Chapter 1240. After driving off the ring road for about 20 minutes, the GPS showed that they had arrived at the destination. Roland looked around, only to find that there was not a single building nearby that could be compared to a hospital. Instead, he saw a few gorgeous new buildings that were comparable to art galleries. This is the place. Garcia nodded. Are you sure? Roland drove the car to the entrance doubtfully and noticed the words, Rhine Greenfield Sanatorium, hanging on the wall. Of course, because every newcomer I brought here basically had the same reaction as you. A few burly men in suits and sunglasses quickly walked out from behind the gate, surrounding the car on both sides. One of them knocked on the window glass and said, Sorry, this is private property. No parking service is provided here. Roland could not help but twitch the corner of his mouth. Hey. Why is this treatment again? Did I say I was here to park the car? Can't I visit patients with a van? Roland was about to take out his hunting license and slap it on the man's face, but Garcia rolled down the window and handed him a card. I just bought the car, so the license plate hasn't been recorded yet. Please register it. The man was obviously stunned. After taking the card, he looked at the car for a while longer, and then turned back to the monitoring room. When he came out again, his attitude was completely different. I'm sorry, Miss Garcia. This isn't the car you registered before, so Isn't it normal to change cars? Garcia calmly interrupted the other party's words. That's true. The man looked at Roland and asked, May I ask who this is? My driver. The atmosphere became a little stiff for a moment. In the end, the leader reacted first and said, I see. I'll register the new license plate for you now. Soon the gate opened, and Roland released the clutch. The van slowly drove into the sanatorium's main entrance amidst the puffing sounds of exhaust. Through the rearview mirror, he could roughly guess how those people were feeling. Garcia was probably the most down-and-out martialist they had ever seen. She could only exchange for a van, yet she insisted on hiring a chauffeur. Well, I thought you wouldn't lie. That's because you don't know me, said Garcia, shrugging her shoulders. I'm not as rigid as you think I am. Besides, you're a member of the association. It's just that your identity card hasn't been issued yet. Can't I get my hunting license? Except for a few people, the specific owners of the license have always been a secret of the association. This is completely different from star martial artists. Although it represents the affirmation and trust of the association, it will also increase the risk of being sniped. In the history of the association, there have been several cases of fallen evils besieging and killing martialists, and the latter were basically hunters who exposed their identities. In other words, as long as I reveal my identity, the fallen evils will send me the natural cores? However, considering the safety of Zero and the other people in the apartment, Roland finally gave up the idea. After the meeting with Lon, he could no longer simply treat the people in the dream world as illusory NPCs. After entering the sanatorium, Roland found that it was a completely different world. Not only was the sanatorium spacious, but there were also bridges, gardens, grasslands, and even road signs such as hot springs, swimming pools, and golf courses. It was not inferior to some high-end scenic spots. Sure enough, poverty had limited his imagination. Even though he had become the king of Grey Castle, he had never imagined that a hospital could be built like this. The inpatient building was located in the center of the sanatorium. Judging from the silver glass walls, it was no exaggeration to say that it was a 5-star hotel. The two of them walked into the hall, and a man as strong as a mountain quickly came to greet them. He was about 40 years old, and his skin was bronze. The bulging muscles on his body stretched his martial arts robe high, and the force of nature on his body was also very obvious. Roland could feel the pressure from more than 10 meters away. He's my master's master, Garcia said in a low voice, and then slightly bowed to the man. Your Excellency, I'm sorry about Lon. Rock squatted down, held her shoulders with both hands, and said in a low voice, I failed to protect her. At the mention of Lon, Garcia looked a little sad. She shook her head and said, It's not your fault. When she was still alive, she often said that martialists would one day sacrifice their lives to fight against the erosion. If you're afraid, you're not qualified to be a member of the association. She taught a good disciple. Rock sighed. Don't worry, I'll definitely make those invaders pay. I'm also willing to do my part to expel the erosion. Rock nodded approvingly, stood up, and looked at Roland. You must be the expert in hunting fallen evils, Mr. Roland. Nice to meet you. I'm one of the 4 guardians of the Prism City, Rock. Nice to meet you. Roland took the initiative to shake hands with him. It's all thanks to your activity that the conflict between the new and the old factions was resolved. I have to thank you for this, Rock said straightforwardly. From now on, please continue to protect this world. It's my duty, Roland replied resolutely. How dare they try to steal from my dream world? How can I not get rid of them completely? His words cheered Garcia up a lot, and she felt that the person she had brought with her was finally on the right track. At 3 o'clock, the visit officially began. There were about 20 people in the group, led by Rock. Obviously, the Prism City did not send out all the higher-ups, but instead selected a few representative figures, such as the celebrity martialist Fei Yuhan. To be honest, when Roland saw her, he felt a little guilty. After all, during the previous joint operation, not only did he get Ling to knock out all the survivors, but he also accidentally let Fei Yuhan hear some clues. He was originally prepared to deny it, but he did not expect her to not raise any objections. However, he definitely did not think that she had forgotten about it. Thus, on the way to the visit, Roland tried his best to keep a distance from Fei Yuhan, and did not speak if he could. Fortunately, she was quite popular, and no matter which room she went to, she was the center of attention, so she did not have the time to confront him. Shaking hands with the injured and giving a few words of encouragement was pretty much the entire process. As Garcia was not in the group, and he was a newcomer to the association, he did not know any of the higher-ups. Thus, rather than calling the visit, it was more like following the defender to familiarize himself. Perhaps this was also the reason why the other party asked him to come. The injured person in the next room is called Valkyries. The doctor glanced at the name list. She was seriously injured and should have been given a good rest. But since you're here, go in and take a look. If possible, please keep quiet. Of course, the recovery of the association members is the most important. Rock nodded and pushed open the door. The wards in the building were all single rooms, and the area was even larger than the apartments in the tube-shaped apartment. It could easily fit more than 20 people. As usual, Roland walked at the back of the group, and only stepped forward when it was his turn to shake hands. But when he looked at the other person in the crowd, he could not help but be shocked. That face was extremely familiar, as if he had seen it somewhere before. Slender eyebrows, a pair of cold eyes, a high nose bridge, and perfectly shaped lips. It could definitely be said to be incomparably exquisite. Even if it was placed on the azure skin, it would not be inferior, or rather, it was even more special. He was stunned for a while before he searched his mind for the source of this familiar feeling. It was the memory fragment he saw in the tube-shaped apartment building. It was a promotion ceremony held in the City of Demons, and the host of it was Valkyries. Roland almost thought that the senior demon had also broken through the barrier of the dream world, and invaded this place from the fragment world behind the door. But when he suppressed his shock and carefully sized up the other party, he realized that the two of them were not exactly the same. Chapter 1241. Roland recalled silently to make sure that he was not mistaken. At that time, the senior demon stood on the high platform and guided the two ascendants to fight against each other. The fluttering white gauze on its body and the rolling red mist heavenly lake under its feet formed a sharp contrast. The eyeball on its head was even more dazzling. Such a picturesque scene would immediately appear in his mind as long as he closed his eyes. But other than the biggest difference, the other parts were somewhat similar. Roland could not help but be very curious about the demon martialist named Valkyries. When it was his turn to shake hands, he did not go through the procedure like before. Instead, he stopped by the bed. "Are you also a resident of the tube-shaped apartment?" The others, who were about to go to the next ward, were slightly startled when they heard this. Valkyries looked indifferent. She seemed to be thinking about how to answer. After a moment, she shook her head. Well, the female demon in the memory fragment should be much older than the one devoured by Zero. She should not be a prisoner of the soul battlefield. Then do you have a twin sister? Someone who looks like you? Roland pointed at his forehead. For example, an extra eye here? There was a commotion in the crowd. The guard coughed twice and said, Mr. Roland. Just a moment. Roland waved his hand. I just feel that she inexplicably looks like someone I used to know. The other party said expressionlessly, No. How is that possible? I've never seen anyone from the Kargard Peninsula with 3 eyes, someone whispered. But there are many people with 3 fingers. Okay. Roland suddenly said with the thought of giving it one last try. Sharita. But the other party's eyes were calm, as if he was the only one who was being silly. If Valkyries was a demon from the other side of the memory fragment, she should have some reaction when she heard this demon language. It seems that she only looks like her. Roland shrugged and reached out his right hand. I hope you can get better soon, and return to the association to fight side by side with everyone to fight against the erosion. She hesitated for a moment before slowly extending her hand. The moment they held hands, Roland couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. The guardian asked, What's wrong? Her hands are so cold. And a little wet. The crowd couldn't help but roar with laughter. Amidst the deliberately suppressed laughter, Roland even heard a few disgruntled murmurs. Frivolous. Why did the traditionalists choose such a person? Okay, the patient needs to rest. Please go and visit the next patient. The doctor shook his head helplessly. Really, Roland shrugged. As the creator of the dream world, he did not care what these people thought of him. However, since he could not get anything out of them, there was no point in staying here any longer. After one last glance at Valkyries, he turned around and left the ward. After the door closed, Valkyries' violently shaken emotions still could not calm down. In this short period of time, it was the most emotional moment of her life. She never thought that there would be a day where she would need to exert all her concentration, just to maintain a fixed expression on her face. And just doing this had consumed most of her energy. When the human walked out from the crowd, Valkyries felt all the blood in her body freeze. She would never forget this figure. In Silent Disaster's memory, it was this person who stood opposite the legacy fragment, coldly watching Silent Disaster being surrounded by the tentacles. It wasn't as simple as watching from the sidelines. The king's memory reading could make everyone who received it feel the same. Therefore, the Silent Lord's panic and shock had affected her to a certain extent. It was this feeling of experiencing it personally that allowed it to immediately match the figure of the other person with the image in its memory. Her previous conjectures were completely overturned. Even if she was unwilling, she had to consider the third possibility. The tremors in the realm of mind did not cause her to deviate, and she did not find the wrong source of the tremors from the beginning. This was indeed a territory opened up by a mortal male, and the other party was the master of this place. If she met this human in the real world, she would only be stunned for a moment before using all her power to kill him. Like some of the Ascended, she also had the power to slay demons. Regardless of whether the other party's magic power had reached such a level, as long as the other party was dead, it would be the same. But in the realm of mind, this rule was not applicable. At least according to the king, no one could defeat her in her sanctum throne. Omniscient and immortal, she was basically no different from the legendary gods. Even if the king was exaggerating, she did not dare to try it now. Valkyries knew very well that dying here was not the worst-case scenario. If the other party had the ability to retrieve memories like the king, everything she knew would bring great harm to the race. Facing such an opponent, she had to be extremely cautious. Fortunately, the third possibility was still not conclusive. For example, the other party seemed to be testing her identity, and not as insightful as the king. Valkyries vaguely sensed that the other party might have seen her somewhere before. Although she did not know why, his words and actions showed that he had an impression of her. And it was very likely that he was in another world. Otherwise, he would not have asked about the third eye. The stone in the center of Valkyries' forehead was the spiritual magic stone she had obtained during her third advancement. And the word Shalita meant hero in the ancient language of the race. Valkyrie stretched out her hand and quietly looked at it for a moment. Her mind recalled the moment when she touched the other party. That how almost made her stop breathing on the spot. But fortunately, she managed to deceive the other party in the end. Valkyries did not forget the purpose of tracking the other party. This sudden meeting was both a challenge and an opportunity. Almost without any effort, she found the key person on the human side. As a male, he had the opportunity to come into contact with the legacy shard, and was able to force the silent disaster to retreat in the confrontation of consciousness. Without a doubt, the other party had a lot of information that the race did not know. Valkyries could not avoid him because of this little risk. Just like how the king created the presiding holy see to better control his subordinates, if this place was really created by a mortal male, then there must be a purpose. Just from the words fallen evils, battlefront, resisting the erosion, and other words, it was full of the smell of conspiracy. Valkyries had to find out what the other party was planning in the realm of mind. For example, the general meeting that the doctor mentioned might be a good way to find out. Thinking of this, Valkyries clenched her fists tightly. Roland, right? Chapter 1242. The general meeting was held in the Great Hall of the sanatorium. Almost all the official martialists were invited. However, Roland noticed that only about 300 people attended the meeting on time, which was much less than the registered number in Prism City. Apart from those who had been seriously injured or killed by the erosion, some people had retreated after the outbreak of the erosion. These people were probably the amateur martialists who had just joined the association. She felt that these martialists were a disgrace to the awakened force of nature in their bodies. When the fallen evils completely overwhelmed human beings, these martialists would also suffer. Roland comforted her casually, but he knew that this had something to do with the loose rules of the association. After all, the dream world was set in the modern world, and the Martialist Association could not bind the martialists to itself. The content of the meeting was basically what he had expected. Defender Rock briefly described the troubles that the association was currently facing. Since the Prism City was invaded, there had been reports of fallen evils attacking the awakened in various places. Although there was no clear evidence, the new enemies in the erosion seemed to be able to command the fallen evils to serve them, which meant that the war between the two sides would enter a new stage. The Martialist Association organized a crusade against the fallen evils, and the fallen evils began to plan to eliminate the martialists. This was undoubtedly extremely disadvantageous for the lone martialists. Therefore, he suggested that before the Prism City returned to normal, this place should be the permanent base of the martialists. Both the official members and the newly awakened could move here to avoid being attacked by the fallen evils. In addition, he also hoped that the awakened who had not responded to the association's invitation would realize the urgency of the situation as soon as possible. In this unavoidable war, the only way to resist the disaster was to unite together. Regardless of the effect, this method of uniting all the forces that could be united as much as possible was a perfect political move. Roland believed that after the news of the meeting spread, there should be some hesitant amateur martialists returning to the association. However, whether all of them would return depended on the subsequent battle. If the association could not gain the upper hand in the battle against the fallen evils, it was likely that more people would be lost. Once their confidence was shattered, it would be very difficult to rebuild it. As expected, the next thing that Rock announced was the counterattack plan. Firstly, the chairman of the association had already dispatched martialists from other cities to support the Prism City. The shortage of manpower would soon be alleviated. Secondly, the martial arts contest would be held as usual, but in fact, it would become a trap to attract the fallen evils. This plan had already been approved by the higher-ups of the association and the government. As long as the enemy dared to show themselves, what awaited them would be the vengeful wrath of the guardians and hunters. Thirdly, the association would also launch a patrol system to prevent the fallen evils from attacking innocent people to divert the attention of society. For this reason, it was necessary to divide the martialists into several groups and arrange their own defense areas. This way, not only would they be able to rush over and provide support as quickly as possible when something happened, but once the intelligence agency discovered the enemy's hiding place, the group would be able to immediately surround and intercept them. The initial counterattack plan could be said to be in line with the norm. At the stage where there was a lack of information, they could only focus on defense. Since there was a certain degree of freedom in the grouping, apart from the leader, the rest of the team members could be chosen by themselves. This made the lobby very lively. Roland naturally didn't want to join any team. In a sense, he alone was an army, and he didn't need anyone to interfere with his magical core plundering plan. Fortunately, there weren't many people who knew his name. Basically, no one was interested in him. Until Fei Yuhan walked up to him and extended an invitation. In fact, as a popular star martialist, she had only taken the initiative to invite 2 people in the entire convention. However, Roland rejected her without hesitation. This made the surrounding people's jaws drop. Even Garcia was extremely puzzled and asked him to reconsider. It could be seen that even Garcia, who was strict with herself, had a lot of respect for this talented woman. After a lot of persuasion, he finally convinced Fei Yuhan that he was more suitable to fight alone. His previous achievements and hunting license were the best proof. The only thing that concerned Roland was that the other person Fei Yuhan took the initiative to invite was actually the demon martialist he had visited in the ward, Valkyries. It was already 10 o'clock in the evening when he returned to the apartment. After settling Zero down, Roland entered the second floor of the Rose Café alone from the side door of the warehouse. More than 50 ancient tequila witches stood solemnly and raised their elbows to him, showing the highest etiquette of the union. This was the first time so many witches had gathered in the dream world, and the small room seemed to be filled with them. Even in the era of the 3 chiefs, such a team of pure combat witches was enough to support a small battle. How is it, any new clues? Roland looked at Faldi. Yes, the flying insects released by the worm nest have captured a few missing magic reactions. Faldi swiped the phone screen to show him the direction. Although her movements were still a little rusty, she had generally grasped how to use the electronic map. Generally, this phenomenon is caused by either the God's Stone of Retaliation, or the tracking target has the ability to hide their magic power. If it's not the case, it means that the magic power itself has died. There are no God's Stones of Retaliation in the dream world, and the force of nature is not as changeable as the witch's abilities, he continued. That's right, so it should be a battle between the fallen evils and the awakened humans. Some of them died, and their cores were taken away. Faldi nodded. From the direction of the magic reactions, it's very likely that they're heading here. The location she pointed to was a river-loading dock. It seemed that remote places near rivers had been the first choice for committing crimes since ancient times. Since the flying insects can't spread so far in a short time, I contacted Ling to investigate. An hour ago, she told me that she had confirmed the traces of the fallen evils, and that there are quite a lot of them. Well done. Roland raised the corner of his mouth. This was the reason why he did not need the association's support. From scouting and locating to eliminating the enemies, the tequila witches could take care of everything. In that case, I think you should all be ready. Your Majesty, please give the order, the witches said in unison. Their faces were full of fighting spirit and eagerness. Obviously, after a whole day of eating, drinking and playing, the team's morale had reached its peak. Moreover, to them, fighting was a way to relive the past. In addition to enjoying the touch and delicious food, using magic power was also fun. Everyone, let's go, Roland said decisively. Chapter 1243. The dock was about 15 kilometers away from the apartment. To avoid attracting attention, the witches split up and took their own taxis to their destinations. Roland was the last to set off. He drove the shabby van out of the neighborhood with Phyllis, Faldi, and the other witches. Ever since he had participated in the joint extermination operation of the Martialist Association, he had begun to pay attention to personal equipment. Although he could not be as well equipped as the association, he could at least buy some civilian equipment to use in the fort. For example, he bought a portable walkie-talkie from a certain website. It not only came with a Bluetooth headset, but also had an effective communication distance of 5 kilometers. Although he found that the effective communication distance would be reduced to less than 2 kilometers when there were buildings blocking the way, or when the electromagnetic environment was complex, but considering that the walkie-talkie was sold for less than 200 coins, and that there was a huge discount for buying more, Roland resolutely equipped each ancient witch with one. At least it was more convenient and discreet than a mobile phone. Roland always felt that the plot scenes in movies where the protagonists and villains were wiped out because their mobile phones suddenly rang at a critical moment were too contrived. It would be stupid of him to encounter such a thing. Faldy, who had the ability to track and locate the witches, naturally became the information processing center. Your Majesty, Betty's team has arrived at the dock and met up with Ling. Tell them to hide and wait for the main force to arrive, Roland said without turning his head. Yes. Donan's team is about 5 minutes away, but she may not have enough money. Ask if anyone has extra money. Help her pay when she arrives. Wait, she said. The driver heard their conversation and agreed to give them a free ride. Oi! Roland could not help but roll his eyes. Why had he never encountered such a good thing when he took a taxi? Faldy's phone rang again less than 5 seconds after he hung up. Your Majesty, Twinkle said she's taking a detour. She doesn't seem to be going to the dock. Roland frowned. Her location is. Before he could finish, he heard a dull thud from the other side of the phone. Then there was a series of noises such as slurping, hissing, and banging. Finally, everything returned to silence. He rubbed his temples. Well, let them take another car. Be careful not to be caught by the cameras when they leave. I understand, Your Majesty. Faldy covered his mouth. Just like that, when everyone arrived at the docks, it was almost an hour later. The first group to arrive had already eaten all the melon seed shells. Fortunately, the enemy seemed to have made the pier their own temporary stronghold, and did not notice the arrival of the witches in the slightest. If this was a battle of pursuit, perhaps they would have already escaped without a trace. Roland suddenly felt that he should buy a few more vans next time to prevent such an embarrassing situation from happening again. He cleared his throat and looked at Ling. What's the enemy's current situation? Your Majesty, most of the fallen evils are in the loading dock, and there are at least 30 of them. The iron boxes in the outer ring had their eyes on them. It was not difficult for Donan to avoid them with her ability. The side of the pier near the river is well lit, so I dared not to get too close and could only look from afar. Most of the enemies are gathered in that area, but there are too many places to escape. If a battle breaks out, it's hard to guarantee that we won't let any of them escape. Ling's ability allowed her to completely blend into the shadows. At night, she could hide as well as Nightingale. She could be called the perfect scout. Roland pondered for a moment. In that case, let's lure them out and kill them. As long as we stay away from the riverbank, we can cut off their escape route and completely surround them. Theoretically it works, but how do we lure them out? Phyllis asked. Roland smiled and pointed at himself. I heard that they're attacking martialists everywhere. Now that there's a lone one, there's no reason for them to let her go. When all the witches disappeared into the darkness of the night, Roland walked out of his hiding place and slowly walked into the dump area, completely acting as if he was just a passerby who happened to pass by this place for a stroll. At this time, the yard was silent. Other than his footsteps and the occasional chirping of insects, there was no other sound. The dim yellow light came from the direction of the pier. At this point, he could only vaguely see the outlines of the stacked boxes. This undulating, crisscrossing wall seemed to form a gloomy maze. It did not look like anyone would come here. At this time, Donan's cheap walkie-talkie came in handy. It reminded him that the fallen evils hiding on the pier had moved. Obviously, the sentries patrolling the periphery had noticed the fluctuation of the force of nature on him, and reported the situation to the gang. The only thing that surprised him was that the enemy did not immediately take action, but allowed him to wander back and forth. Suddenly, the searchlight in the yard was turned on, and the whole yard became as bright as day. Under the dazzling white light, Roland vaguely saw a dozen figures gradually appear. When his eyes adapted to the sudden glare, he found that he was surrounded. The leader of the group wore a mask with a strange pattern on it. He looked very different from the fallen evils around him, both in terms of aura and appearance. Roland noticed that the pattern on the mask looked like a door that was about to open. In addition, the two people beside the leader did not look like ordinary fallen evils. Their eyes were not dull, and they were wearing the robes of the Martialist Association. Good evening, poor lost man, said the leader, who was unexpectedly polite. I don't know what brings you here, but you must understand that there is no chance of escape now. Rather than waste your energy on meaningless things, you'd better listen to me quietly. Roland looked around and saw fallen evils everywhere. Don't be afraid. I don't want to kill you. On the contrary, this may be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you. I've just come to this world, and I need your help. The man spread out his hands and said, Don't be in a hurry to refuse. Please allow me to introduce myself. I'm Alpha, the messenger of God. I come from the so-called erosion. According to his original plan, Roland should have pretended to be panic-stricken at this moment, so that the enemy would lower their guard. But for some reason, looking at the other party's polite attitude as if everything was under control, he suddenly wanted to rush up and ruthlessly punch the other party's face. You're the monster that invaded the Prism City? Invasion isn't accurate, because this place belongs to the gods, Alpha said unhurriedly. Now it's time to return it. Listen up, lost man. You so-called martialists are bound to fail. It's better to pledge loyalty to God than to return to nothingness. It's normal that you can't understand now. We'll have plenty of time to talk about the truth of this world later. Forget about those illusory promises. Now, I can show you the most direct benefit, power. He stretched out a finger, and as a red light appeared on his fingertip, a strong wave of magic power swarmed out. I can inject it into your body and make you far more powerful than you are now. His Excellency didn't lie to you, the two people beside the man echoed. I've just awakened, but now I feel like I'm filled with endless power. Also, it won't make you lose your mind and become crazy like the fallen evils. What if I don't agree? Then I'll have to make you like these monsters. Although they're a little weak, they're obedient enough. Alpha shrugged. On one side is the truth of the world and great power, and on the other side is the annihilation of your consciousness, and turning you into a puppet that yearns for the force of nature. You should be able to make a wise choice. Your Majesty, all personnel are in position, Faldi said in a low voice through the earpiece. Roland twitched his mouth. Let me tell you what the truth of the world is. I created this world, and I don't want to give it to anyone. So you have two choices. One is to hand over all your cores and die here, and the other is to be killed by me. After that, I'll spend some effort to collect your cores. What do you think? Ignorant fool, the traitorous martialist shouted. Just you alone? Chapter 1244. Ha! Surround me? Don't be so pretentious. No fluctuation of the force of nature can hide from Alpha. Before the martialist could finish his words, he was hit in the face by a container flying toward him. The huge impact sent him tumbling backward, and at the same time, his voice was cut off in his throat. Another traitor stared dumbfoundedly at the witches flying out from their hiding places. Some of them came from the ground, some from the sky, but most of them appeared out of thin air, as if they had been waiting there for a long time. This situation was completely against common sense. With so many people hiding less than 10 meters away, even if there was no fluctuation of the force of nature, they should have been able to detect their breathing and footsteps. Why didn't the fallen evils who acted as sentries sound the alarm? But now there was no time to think. In an instant, the two groups of witches were engaged in a melee. The originally silent dock suddenly erupted into a frenzy. Ling had been wandering outside the range of the searchlight. Light and shadow always went hand in hand. Although the searchlight overhead illuminated the yard, it also made the darkness behind the iron suitcases more intense. She had long chosen her targets. The fallen evils standing on the high ground. The long shadows of the fallen evils were connected with the backlight of the suitcases, which was a natural flaw for her. If someone were to look at Ling's back when she was approaching the enemy, they would see a very shocking scene. Her entire body had disappeared into the shadows, leaving only half of her head exposed. From time to time, a few bubbles would come out from under her nose, but they did not make any sound. Soaking in the shadow, she felt warm and comfortable. Even the hot springs in this world could not compare with it. Ever since she transformed into a god's punishment body, she had thought that she would never be able to experience this feeling again, until Phyllis brought back an incredible piece of news a year ago. a strange world that could bring them back to the past. Ling fell in love with this new world at first sight. His Majesty had also changed from a somewhat maverick king to an inviolable chosen one. Even though he could not activate the divine mote instrument, she had always tried to persuade Pasha, Celine, and the others to get more opportunities to enter the dream of nature. She had worked hard to get the chance to be chosen as the guardian of the witches who entered the dream of nature. Fighting the demons was his most important mission, but as long as it didn't violate this principle, it was naturally best to relax. Therefore, anyone who wanted to harm His Majesty or destroy the dream world was an unforgivable enemy of the Tequila Witches. Ling rose from the shadows like a ghost and stabbed a dagger into the chest of the fallen evil. These enemies would not be fatally injured by ordinary weapons, so an additional action was needed to inject magic into them. Under the influence of the surging magic power, she could clearly feel that the rotation of the other party's star vortices had become unstable. This kind of situation was similar to the mutual interference between the effects of the ability, and it also confirmed His Majesty's opinion. There was no essential difference between the force of nature and magic power, and they both came from erosion. After that, he just had to casually pull out the corroded core, and the enemy would be paralyzed into a pile of meat paste. The moment the fallen evil collapsed, she had already leaped over several boxes that were several meters apart, and appeared behind another fallen evil. Fierce sounds of battle erupted from below as well. Soon, all the enemies who served as sentries were wiped out by her. Ling stood at the highest point of the yard, overlooking the entire battlefield. Her sisters had maintained the same level of use of their abilities as 400 years ago, and they had even become more agile because of Scourge's training. However, compared to their own strength, what was more eye-catching was their soaring momentum. Betty's immense strength allowed her to become as powerful as a transcendent in a short period of time. She held the iron box in one hand and rushed to the front, scattering the fallen evils that came after her. Flash and Phyllis were still very tacit partners. Whenever Flash blinded the enemy with a strong flash, Phyllis's blade claws would appear in the most fatal parts of the enemy. Dawn and rather. Everyone was the same. This kind of exciting battle reminded Ling of the Tequila era. She could not help but look at Roland. Perhaps even he did not realize the significance of the dream world to the Tequila Witches. Not only was this a place where they could regain their sense of touch and enjoy themselves, but it also allowed them to relax their taut hearts. The hundreds of years after the collapse of the three saint cities, and the division of the Union, could be said to be the darkest time for the survivors. Although everyone took a deep breath and tried their best to adapt to their new bodies, their gradually fading senses made them lose the joy of living. Moreover, they did not have a clue about the Chosen One's plan, and everyone was under great pressure. Even if they could survive by changing their bodies, their mental state was deteriorating day by day. At that time, Ling even suspected that they might collapse under the pressure without the demon's help. But now, the third border city was full of vitality. Everyone was excitedly discussing which restaurant had the best takeout, and their forgotten senses were gradually regaining their senses. Even if they did not enter the dream world, they could still hear the cheers and laughter, which was completely different from the scene 100 years ago. Ling knew that her sisters felt the same, which was why she showed such a high morale. The dream world could not tolerate the existence of these erosion enemies. She jumped down from the shadow behind a fallen evils and joined the battle below. As soon as the container was thrown out by Betty, Roland had already rushed forward and bumped into the leader of the enemy. Roland knew from his experience of fighting with magic creatures that these monsters were extremely troublesome for martialists, and they were the biggest variable on the battlefield. Whether it was the strange black and red domain, or the twisting black tentacles, they were very troublesome to deal with. Even the witches could not escape if they were entangled. However, the ability of the magic creatures had no effect on him. As long as he stalled the leader, the witches would naturally deal with the rest of the enemies. The situation was just as Roland had expected. When Alpha found that he could not get rid of Roland for a while, his arrogant tone finally changed. I already told you that I'm the creator of this place. Roland did not want to give the other party a chance to speak. After all, he had heard the same words over and over again. So what if you're an oracle? Is an oracle that great? He pinned him to the ground, muttering indignantly as he pummeled his enemy's face until the strange mask broke into pieces, revealing the rotating astrolabe underneath. Its face was the core of a huge mass. Without hesitation, Roland grabbed the astrolabe and pulled it outward until it completely fell off. At that moment, the jubilant power in his body suddenly gushed out and engulfed the astrolabe, turning it into a dazzling pillar of light that shot out from his hand and into the sky. As if they had heard the call of the pillar of light, the cores that had fallen off from the fallen evils scattered into specks of starlight and gathered together, lighting up the dark sky for a moment. The feeling that the world was faintly changing came back to him. But this was not the end. The pillar of light became brighter and brighter, showing no signs of weakening, until it completely enveloped him. Roland felt something was crazily rushing into his mind, and a sharp pain almost made him lose consciousness. Everything in front of him became blurred, and countless snowflakes filled his vision like a black and white television in the 1970s. Hiss hiss. Chapter 1245. What is going on? Roland tried to make a sound or move his body, but he got no response. Flickering images kept flashing before his eyes, like a slideshow. Countless black dots moved around the sinkhole, like ants building a nest. Gradually, a high platform rose from the ground. However, compared to the incomparably huge sinkhole, the huge platform was only equivalent to a slightly raised mound on the ground. But he was surprised to find that he had seen this building built with rough stone before. On the mural in the Temple of the Cursed. Following his thought, the snowflakes on the screen zoomed in with a hissing sound. The black dots turned into squirming creatures, and their appearance matched the main body in the mural, the Radiation Clan. Soon, the scene in front of him overlapped with the contents of the mural. More than 10 main bodies carried the relics of the gods onto the platform and formed a circle. Their bodies expanded and contracted as if they were performing some kind of ritual. Below the platform, tens of thousands of matchstick men were escorted to the surroundings of the sinkhole, and then pushed into the bottomless sinkhole while the Radiation Clan danced wildly. In this fanatical atmosphere, the last relic was pieced together, and the clear crystal became a complete and smooth prismatic body. It emitted a dazzling light and floated toward the sinkhole. Then it fell straight down and quickly disappeared from sight. He suddenly realized that this might be the bottomless land that Lon mentioned. But this was only the beginning. The next scene made Roland's eyes widen. He saw an orange beam of light rising from the sinkhole, shooting straight into the sky. This scene was like the vision of the dream world mentioned by the ancient witches, but much more magnificent. And the position in the sky happened to be facing the bloody moon, which was where the erosion was. For a moment, heaven and earth seemed to be connected, and the so-called bottomless land and the erosion mouth were just two ends of the beam of light. The Radiation Clan rushed into the sinkhole like moths to a flame, but they did not fall into the abyss. Instead, they floated lightly, as if they were being carried by something, and rose to the end of the sky. For a moment, there were countless black dots in the beam of light. Is this the upgrade of civilization? Roland couldn't help but think to himself as he watched the black dots disappear into the clouds under the gentle pillar of light, breaking free from the shackles of the earth and entering a new world. Such a magnificent scene would probably stir anyone's heart. But in such a scene, he heard a deep sigh. The sound seemed to echo directly in his mind, so clear that it could not be an illusion. After the sigh, time flowed much faster, and the snowflake-like noise became denser. The scene changed constantly, causing the earth to look like it had changed into mulberry fields. Scattered towns appeared beside the patio. Perhaps not all of the radiation race had chosen to join the light pillar, but a small number of them had chosen to stay. Was it out of nostalgia for this world, or fear of the sky and the unknown? Roland did not know. He only saw that occasionally there were still black spots walking into the passage that connected heaven and earth, like the adventurers in the legends who pursued the deeds of the sages and embarked on an unknown road. However, compared to the scene where the races gathered at the beginning, they seemed much more lonely. The pillar of light became dimmer and dimmer. At a certain moment, it flickered twice and completely disappeared without a trace. The dense snowflakes had covered every corner of Roland's field of vision, as if the story was coming to an end. According to the current situation, the world would return to peace, and the legend of the path to heaven would be preserved in the biographies of the radiation race for generations to come. Perhaps there would be some unwilling descendants who would go into the patio and try to find the path to upgrade and regain the glory of God. But that would be a long time in the future. Just when Roland thought the scene would end like this, a high wall suddenly appeared at the end of the earth. At first he thought it was just an illusion. After all, the dense snowflakes had seriously obstructed his vision. But when the wall approached the patio, he finally saw what it was. Giant waves, taller than the impassable mountain range, were crashing down on the earth with unstoppable momentum, instantly swallowing up the jigsaw towns. The height of the waves was even as high as the clouds, reflecting a new skyline under the sunlight. Roland could imagine how desperate the Radiation Clan must have been after witnessing all this. But this was far from the end of the disaster. As soon as the tsunami passed, volcanoes rose in the distance. The violent eruption eclipsed the sun, and volcanic ash rose into the sky, forming a special phenomenon of electric discharge. Then came the heavy rain and the cold winter, as if the Earth's crust had suddenly entered the most active period. In front of this doomsday scene, the original appearance of the world was no longer there. Hiss hiss. The image was gradually distorted, and the noise had almost completely filled up everything he saw. Before everything disappeared, the last thing he saw was the glacier melting, and a tenacious plant poking its head out of the soil and opening a new bud. Your Majesty! Your Majesty! Are you okay? Roland felt someone gently shaking him, and his voice was full of worry. He suddenly opened his eyes. The ubiquitous snowflakes had disappeared, and everything in his eyes was clear again. It was still the inland river dock. It's over? Roland looked at his palm and murmured to himself. Phyllis, however, thought he was asking her. Yes, all the enemies were killed. None of them escaped. The magic cores also disappeared. The whole process lasted for several minutes. Only you stood there motionlessly, as if you were asleep. Your Majesty, are you really okay? Roland did not know whether he was fine or not. Everything that he had experienced before was not an illusion. Now that he thought about it a little, he could reproduce all the scenes that he had seen. It was as if a bunch of memories of unknown origin had suddenly appeared in his mind. If that was all, he could even feel the exhaustion and weariness brought by the long passage of time. It was as if he had finished the journey of thousands of years in a few minutes. That sigh also became an expression of his empathy. Lan's words suddenly came to Roland's mind. Compared to what I tell you, the real answer is what you understand yourself. Is this the end of the battle of divine will? I'm fine. He took a deep breath. I just saw some strange scenes. Strange scenes? Phyllis blinked and then skipped this sentence. It's not the time to talk about this, Your Majesty. The light just now almost lit up half of the sky. Many people should have noticed this area. If we don't leave as soon as possible, it's very likely that the association will notice us. I see. Let's go back according to the group we came from. He nodded and said, whether it was the oracle's memory or something else, Roland could not tell for now, but he believed that these unknown questions would be answered one day. Chapter 1246. In the northernmost port of the Kingdom of Everwinter. Don't push. Get in line. Throw away your luggage. Don't bring it on board. The King of Greycastle will give you enough food and clothes. If you want to live, throw them into the water. Hurry up. Women and children first. The port was crowded with refugees. Many of them were rushing to the ships that were raising their sails. If the First Army and the Lord's Guards had not maintained order with their swords, the narrow trestles would have become a road to hell where the strong preyed on the weak. Captain, this ship? I'm afraid it's not enough. The guard looked back worriedly. At this time, a ship full of refugees was slowly leaving the port. He must be a real man to dare to come to the northernmost port at this time. Uncle Sang's eyes never left the muzzle. In just 3 or 4 days, the red mist had spread from the top of the impassable mountain to the northernmost port. It was like thick blood hanging on the skyline, making people feel depressed. Boss, Will you save a seat for us? The man muttered. If it's Nail, Uncle Sang said with a smile. Even if he doesn't get on the ship himself, he'll make room for us. More than half a month ago, they received an order to leave the Hermes Plateau for the northernmost city of the Kingdom of Everwinter. Compared with guarding the Holy City, Nail was much more relaxed after receiving the new order. He talked a lot more on the way and started working as soon as they arrived at the northernmost port. They were not the first to arrive at the Grey Castle in the Kingdom of Everwinter. More of their comrades had already gone to other parts of the kingdom to evacuate the residents. At first, the evacuation did not go smoothly. It was not until the appearance of the Crimson Moon that the situation improved. This was all due to the rumor that the Crimson Moon represented the end of the world. Therefore, when the Crimson Moon really appeared in the sky, many local people were scared out of their wits and directly went to the military station to ask to leave. Unfortunately, the good times did not last long. Only 4 or 5 days later, the news of the Red Mist came from the front line. Within the same day, the First Army fought with the demons. They didn't know the outcome of the battle, but the result was that all the vanguard squads began to retreat to the south. Nail's squad also received the order to retreat to the next port. However, in these few days, the number of refugees increased several times. Every day, tens of thousands of people came to the northernmost port and begged the ships to take them away. Nail could not just sit back and do nothing. He built a simple line of defense on the spot and informed the rear troops by flying messengers, asking for more ships. As a result, the evacuation plan was delayed for several days. However, Uncle Sang knew that once the news spread, fewer and fewer ships would dare to sail to the north. These fjords merchant ships who had been paid by His Majesty would not risk their lives for him. They might leave the port, but they would never arrive. Based on the current situation, this would be the last batch of ships to sail to the north. Fortunately, Nail should also know this, so he asked them to bury the explosives early in the morning. Firstly, they could resist the enemy when necessary, and secondly, they could destroy the equipment that could not be taken away, lest it fall into the hands of the demons. "Captain, there's smoke rising in front," someone shouted. Again, Uncle Sang spat on the ground and said, "Everyone get into position." In the absence of enough manpower and witches to investigate, the ancient way of communication came into play again. This was not the first time that the demons had visited the northernmost port. There were several demon corpses lying in the field outside the town. According to the handbook distributed by their superiors, they were almost mad demons. Although the demons were sparse and low-level, it meant that they had indeed appeared on the land of the Kingdom of Everwinter, and were gradually approaching the town as the red mist spread. Nail's squad had been stationed in Hermes since the Battle of Coldwind Ridge, and had not participated in the expedition against the Tequila. Although Uncle Sang had heard a lot of rumors, it was the first time for him to fight against the demons. Over the past few days, Uncle Sang concluded that as long as the mad demons were not within 200 meters, they were easier to deal with than the church's scourge. Therefore, he was not too worried about the smoke rising in front of him. On the contrary, he was very concerned about Nail's next decision. There was no doubt that the remaining 2 ships could not take all the refugees out of this place. How should the boss deal with the rest of the refugees? Should he leave them to fend for themselves or take them to the south along the coastline? Just then, the first mad demon appeared outside the barbed wire fence on the street. Uncle Sang could not help but frown. Like most port towns, the northernmost port did not have a city wall. Therefore, the defense line was set on the main road of the dock. Except for the refugees, the rest of the residents had already been evacuated. It was not surprising that the demons were attracted here. What surprised him was that the scouts were still nowhere to be seen. Theoretically, they should have retreated after lighting the beacon and returned to the defense line faster than the demons. Gradually, more mad demons appeared from the corner of the street and swarmed toward the dock. Fire! 2 machine gun squads fired at the end of the street at the same time and rained bullets on the demons. The demons reacted quickly and immediately used the surrounding buildings as their hiding places. When the smoke dissipated, only 2 corpses were left hanging on the barbed wire fence. Soon gunshots were heard from the rooftops. Apparently, The demons had encountered the sniper team that had been waiting for them for a long time. This was how the sniper team defended the port. Considering that the field of vision in the town was not as wide as that in the suburbs, what he had done the most over the past week was to set up roadblocks. Whether it was to dump garbage or demolish houses, 9 out of 10 alleys leading to the dock were blocked, and each block occupied an entire street. These roadblocks could not prevent the demons from moving, but they could effectively delay them. If the demons did not want to waste time clearing and climbing over the roadblocks, they would have to break through the main road blocked by machine guns. The next step was to fight the demons, suppress them with firepower, and continue to look for cover. The demons should be small in number. Based on the current situation, it was unlikely that they would rush to the defense line and throw their spears. At this time, they should choose to retreat. However, the demons were still stubbornly hiding, as if they wanted to exhaust the First Army's ammunition. In terms of perseverance, this small team of demons was much more tenacious than the ones they had seen a few days ago. It was as if they had seen a lot of bullets. Uncle Sang sneered. If the God's Punishment Army knew this trick, they would not be able to withstand it. Unfortunately, the First Army was much more well-equipped now. Their 100-soldier team was equipped with 4 Mark I machine guns, which could easily last them for a day. If they continued to fight, the demons would die here sooner or later. However, a sudden change occurred at this moment. Uncle Sang heard a loud bang, and saw a cloud of dust rise from the building to the north of the dock. A giant armored creature smashed through layers of stone walls and climbed out of the ruins. A spider demon? The soldier asked in surprise. Prepare the anti-demon grenades. Uncle Sang's heart sank. The handbook did mention a kind of demon that looked like a spider, but this one looked different from the ones they had seen before. Chapter 1247. 2 soldiers quickly approached the new enemy and pulled the triggers of the anti-demon grenades. 2 wisps of green smoke shot out from the bunker one after the other toward the huge spider demon. It was almost impossible to miss such an eye-catching target. Uncle Sang's heart skipped a beat when he saw the trail of the grenades. He had a feeling that the thick carapace on the spider demon's body was not easy to deal with. His bad premonition came true. Because the angle of the grenade was slightly off, after hitting the target, it bounced to one side and directly fell into the ground. The other one hit the spider demon's front leg head-on. The explosion stirred up a cloud of thick smoke. However, the spider demon did not stop moving. It only paused for a moment before it stepped out of the smoke. "Idiot, shoot its body," one of his subordinates shouted. "Let me try." Another soldier volunteered. He carried a box of grenades and climbed out of the trench. Uncle Sang did not stop him, but he was not as optimistic as the others. He now understood why the new spider demon was so strange. Compared to the ugly and irregular monsters in the manual, this monstrous beast was much more coordinated. The armor on its limbs was not a random pile of stones, but a well-organized, multifaceted prism. If the monstrous beast retracted its limbs, it might be able to form a trapezoidal platform with the stones on its back. Moreover, when the spider demon moved, its limbs changed greatly, which made it difficult for the soldiers to accurately hit its torso or abdomen. It was not a coincidence that they missed the spider demon. As expected, the next few grenades did not stop the spider demon. It even deliberately closed its limbs after the grenades were fired, as if it was a conditioned reflex. At the same time, the mad demon appeared in the gap created by the enemy. "Damn it! Can't these guys shoot more accurately?" The machine gunner complained as he adjusted the muzzle. "Enough," Uncle Sang said decisively. "Retreat to the second line of defense and leave this area to them. Get ready to detonate the explosives." "But, no buts," Uncle Sang shouted. "If we are surrounded from the side, we won't be able to escape even if we want to." The bugle sounded quickly. Nail's team followed the training plan and retreated to the port. As for the refugees, they could only watch helplessly as the monster approached, and the queue began to panic. The soldier in charge of the detonation nimbly connected the detonating wire to a hand-cranked motor and quickly shook it. "Captain, we're ready to detonate at any time." "Very well, let it have a taste of explosives." Uncle Sang stared at the rampaging monstrous beast and gestured with his hand. Wait a little longer. Now, as the soldiers fiercely pressed down on the detonation lever, more than 10 muffled explosions rang in everyone's ears. In an instant, the ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble, and a series of rising pillars of smoke almost filled the entire empty space. One pile of explosives was buried under the spider demon. The fierce impact caused half of its body to fly up into the air. The stone armor on its feet became a heavy burden and broke its joints. By the time it landed, it no longer had the ability to move. Like a giant beast that had been blown up, it slumped to the ground. A series of whistles sounded in the camp. However, before everyone could heave a sigh of relief, a similar crash sounded from the east side of the dock. Another spider demon suddenly appeared on the battlefield. Seeing this scene, Uncle Sang was glad that he had made the right choice. He vaguely realized that the demon's attack this time would be completely different from the previous ones. It was obvious that they intended to surround them and wipe them out. The sentries did not return on time, most likely because they had been cut off by the enemy. If they had hesitated for a moment longer, the machine gun squad would not have been able to escape unscathed. Although the First Army had given up on blocking the narrow street, the 4 Mark-I guns were still able to suppress the mad demon's advance for the time being. However, this did not mean that the crisis was over. Who knew how many spider demons the enemy had prepared? If 2 more came? No, if 1 more came, they would only be able to hold on for a few minutes. To make matters worse, there were still many refugees on the dock waiting to evacuate. Once panic spread and order went out of control, they would not even be able to return to the ships, let alone rescue them. When the smoke dissipated, the demons had already taken advantage of this opportunity to enter the empty space that had been turned over by the explosives. The sound of machine guns firing rang out incessantly. Boom! While Uncle Sang was at his wit's end, he suddenly heard a familiar roar behind him. Even with his eyes closed, he could still recognize the source of the sound. To the First Army, the sound of the 152mm longsong cannons could not be any more familiar. However, they had not deployed any artillery at all. Uncle Sang turned around in surprise and saw a ship made of steel slowly sailing into the harbor. The cannon at the bow of the ship was almost parallel to the deck, pointing straight at the defense line. That's the Roland. Someone among the soldiers quickly recognized the iron ship. Haven't they already retreated? Forget it. We have reinforcements. Long live His Majesty. Kill those bastards. Shells whizzed over the soldiers' heads and landed on the empty space one after another. Occasionally, the smoke rose from the trench, and the shrapnel even hit the sandbags in front of the trench. The flying soil was like raindrops, smashing on their heads. Usually, they would curse the artillery battalion with the most vicious language, calling them blind and lunatics. But now there were only sounds of praise in the trench. The roars of the longsong cannons seemed to have become the most pleasant music to the ears. Did Nail not abandon the rest of the people, because he had been waiting for this moment? Uncle Sang noticed that the last group of refugees were boarding the Roland, under the guidance of the soldiers. Now there were just enough people on the dock. Although he did not know how Nail had asked for instructions from his superiors, it was obviously the best time to evacuate. Attention, everyone. Let's go to the dock now, Uncle Sang shouted. One by one. Don't fall behind. Once everyone leaves, detonate the rest of the explosives. The order was quickly spread throughout the trench by word of mouth. The final evacuation had begun. The Mark-I type heavy machine guns and the rest of the ammunition were left behind. Although the soldiers were distressed by the loss, it was His Majesty's order. Under any circumstances, the safety of the people should take precedence over the weapons. As long as the soldiers were still alive, the weapons could be made again. After they entered the dock, the demons occupied the second defense line under the bombardment. However, what awaited them was a deafening explosion. Thousands of kilograms of explosives sent the remaining weapons and the mad demons into the sky. Chapter 1248. Zoe stood on the railing of the bridge, looking down at the noisy crowd on the deck. The Roland was not large, and it had to be forced to accommodate nearly 1,000 people. As a result, every empty seat was occupied. leaving no space for them to sit down. Moreover, it was the first time for most of the refugees to go to sea, and the bumpy sea conditions soon made them feel uncomfortable. Dizziness and vomiting were everywhere, and the dense crowd aggravated the reaction. Even those who were physically fit could not stand it for a long time when they were vomited all over their faces. She could not help but feel lucky that the god's punishment body could not smell. Mortals are so fragile. Carol's voice suddenly came from behind. I can't believe we used to do this. Indeed. Zoe nodded sympathetically. She naturally knew what Carol was referring to. When the captain received the request for help, he immediately went to find them. Since the main task of the Roland was to determine the general location of the god's stone mine, Zoe had the final say in all the operations. At that time, the ship carried the magic core of the underground civilization, so they should try their best to avoid any accidents. Moreover, the huge core skeleton almost occupied the entire rear deck, and even if they went there, they would not be able to transport many people. Faced with such a request, she should have flatly refused. In the era of the Union, the magic core was extremely limited, and it could not be replicated, so it was not comparable to the magic core of mortals at all. Not to mention the refugees, even if she had to choose between a town and the core instrument, she would not hesitate at all. But now she was hesitant. After discussing with her companions for a while, Zoe made a decision that even she herself found unbelievable. She unloaded the magic core in another port town, entrusted the local First Army to guard it, and returned to the northernmost port with the Roland. She even told the garrison that if the ship did not return on time, they must send the instrument back to Neverwinter. But it doesn't feel bad. Carol shrugged with a smile. To be honest, I feel rather conflicted when I think that you might reject me. I hope they can live up to His Majesty's expectations, Zoe deliberately said with a cold face. What gradually changed the minds of his companions. Many scenes appeared in her mind. The First Army fighting against the demons in the ruins of the Holy City, the nurses taking care of her in the hospital, the ordinary people in the dream world who were no different from witches, and Roland Wimbledon. Yeah, we didn't take such a huge risk to return to the Red Mist area in vain. Carol patted her on the shoulder, and turned to walk toward the bridge. In any case, this mission has been successfully completed. I really want to go back to Neverwinter as soon as possible. Whenever I think of the Sichuan-style hot pot in the dream world, I'm drooling. Gulp. Zoe could not help but gulp. Fortunately, Carol had already closed the door to the tunnel, so she did not hear this soft sound. She cast aside her distracting thoughts and looked at the red mist in the distance. More than 400 years ago, the Battle of Divine Will, which had brought endless nightmares to the Union, was finally coming again. Although it was much earlier than expected and the strength of the demons had undergone tremendous changes, she was calmer than she had expected. This time, they were no longer fighting alone. Hacksword was floating above a city that had just been occupied. There was no billowing smoke, nor was there a bloody battlefield. Most of the buildings were in good condition, and it did not look like a place that had just experienced a dangerous siege. The resistance of the humans was negligible, even worse than 400 years ago. If not for its trust in Osrook, it would have thought that the ones occupying the southwest of this continent were not humans, but the Skysea realm. In just a short week, the demon army had expanded the battlefront to a distance of hundreds of miles, and established outposts in places that were not yet covered by the life floaters. This process could not be completed so quickly without the help of the humans. According to the reports from his subordinates, the demons had only slightly threatened the lords and nobles, such as chopping off a few hundred people's heads, but the other side was already scared out of their wits and began to transport resources to the demon army. This situation was exactly the same as the first Battle of Divine Will. It seemed that the news of the first city it conquered, the Snow Reflection Castle, and setting it on fire had already spread. The other side undoubtedly understood the consequences of going against the demon army. With the expansion of the offensive, Hacksword gradually obtained a lot of information from the humans. It did not understand why the demon army, which had already united as a whole during the Union's era, had now become a pile of loose sand. A mere corner of the continent had actually been divided into 4 kingdoms, and their orders were not interlinked. The union that had once ruled over the human army had also disappeared. What had they spent their time on in the past 400 years? It did not seem to be the case for a kingdom that lacked power. After all, even its most valued genius general had fallen in the hands of the humans. Did the other side not understand the power of unity? But regardless, Hacksword's heart that had been hanging in suspense was finally at ease. Although there were many accidents in the Western Front offensive, it was still successfully carried out according to plan. The birth tower had now been successfully activated, and it had not let down the king's trust. At least, compared to Blood, who only had a loud voice, and Mask, whose words could not be trusted, it had at least fulfilled its promise. After passing through a series of distortion doors, Hacksword returned to the collapse of the cracked Ridge Mountains. As a stronghold to annex the last piece of the puzzle in the Land of Dawn, it had already decided to name this city Sky. Just like its own title, this city would definitely be remembered by the demon army. Almost at the same time, the adjutant also sent reports of the advancement in other directions. The Sky Lord quickly read through the reports submitted by the various divisions, and a detail caught his attention. There was a large number of refugees fleeing everywhere in the Kingdom of Everwinter. If that was all, it would not be surprising. After all, most of the refugees would die on the way even if they were left alone. And this kind of fleeing seemed to be organized and premeditated. They were all heading south towards the Kingdom of Wolfheart, and they were advancing on land and water simultaneously. Not only did the troops that wanted to stop them fail to stop them, but they were also fiercely counterattacked. Their behavior was very similar to that of the enemies that Osrook had mentioned. Even though a few troops led by Ascendants had achieved victory, they still lacked the manpower to completely stop them. This was also the disadvantage of choosing to erect the birth tower on a high mountain. Without the assistance of the distortion door, the primal demons and junior demons would not be able to rely on their own strength to trek into the human territory. He could not help but frown. Where's the Nightmare Lord? The Nightmare Lord is still immersed in the floating pool, and has not shown any signs of waking up. Damn it, it's almost been more than 10 days. Did this guy go too deep, and get swallowed by the realm of mind? Hacksword summoned a distortion door, and stepped into the lowest level of the Rift Valley. Valkyries maintained her initial silent posture, as she sat cross-legged in the shimmering water. Her expression was natural, without any signs of struggle when she was being devoured. Other than the fact that she had been connected for a long time, there was nothing out of the ordinary. This meant that it was still conscious and was swimming in the sea of consciousness. If the other party was a blood conqueror, the Sky Lord would have long slapped him. Forcibly leaving the realm of mind would damage his memory, which was not important to the former. But for the Nightmare Lord, he did not dare to be so rash. Of all times to be immersed in it, it just had to be now. The human's retreat was too deliberate, which made him feel that something was wrong. However, he could not explain this to the king. After all, there were already 2 Grand Lords on the Western Front, and it was unlikely that they would send another Grand Lord to chase after those lowly mortals. If he were to say this to the Holy See, he would be ridiculed. However, in reality, he had already done his best to send troops, while the other Grand Lord only acted according to his own thoughts, and was of no help to the situation. It was equivalent to the Western Front not having a single usable Grand Lord, which greatly weakened the long-distance pursuit of the troops. If the Nightmare Lord could help him eliminate those escapees, he would not be in such an awkward situation. After glaring at the Nightmare Lord for a while, Hacksword had no choice but to leave the Red Mist Pond. Chapter 1249. In the Kingdom of Wolfheart, at the Sedimentation Bay, White drove a carriage of people into the bustling port area. Ladies and gentlemen, we're about to arrive at our destination. No matter what you've been through in the past, I'm sure you'll have a new life waiting for you. I wish you all a smooth journey in advance, and I'd like to offer you one last convenient service. White shouted enthusiastically as he pulled the reins to slow down his horse. He had been living a good life recently. Ever since the arrival of the Grey Castle fleet, the sedimentation base suddenly boomed, especially in the short-distance transportation industry. He could earn about 10 silver royals by transporting people from the surrounding towns to the port. He could do this job at least twice a day, and if he was not worried about the damage of the carriage, he could even transport another batch of people at night. His income was almost as high as when he had worked for the church. What was even more amazing was that the reward was not collected from the people on the train, but from the people of Grey Castle. As long as they stamped a piece of paper with the stamp of both places, they would receive the reward according to the number of people they killed after passing through the checkpoint. The reward would be paid immediately without delay. Because of this, transportation became a popular industry. Many sailors and handymen joined in. Even if they did not know how to drive a carriage, they could still find someone to work for them. They did not need to pick their passengers, and when they arrived at the destination, they could just pick a full carriage and set off. The only thing they had to consider was which town to transport people to. After all, the distance was related to the cost. Obviously, Grey Castle wanted to treat everyone equally. As long as they were willing to leave the kingdom of Wolfheart, they would help them regardless of whether they had money or not. However, the king of Grey Castle was wealthy and could afford to do whatever he wanted. White did not want to let go of this hard-earned opportunity. After all, he would be a fool not to make money. Moreover, he had already heard that something had happened in the north. The number of refugees pouring into the kingdom of Wolfheart from the border was increasing rapidly. Those rumors were not groundless. He also heard from Smarty that the lord of the Sedimentation Bay, Baron Jean Bate, had secretly transported a lot of things from his mansion onto the ship. If even Baron had to avoid risks, White naturally had to make preparations in advance. If he could make more money now, he would have more leeway in the future. What kind of convenient service? Someone asked. Some useful experiences and reminders. White pointed to the harbor where large ships were gathered. Look over there. Although everyone wants to go to Grey Castle, the journey is not the same. I was in the Sedimentation Bay before they came here, so I've heard some things. Maybe I can be of some help to you in the future. Then please tell us. Of course, the prerequisite is that you have to spend a small sum of money. Not much, just 1 silver royal will do. White knew that those penniless people didn't care about their future. As long as they had food to eat, it didn't make much difference whether they asked or not. Therefore, from the beginning, his target was the refugees who had some savings. They were always particularly interested in this kind of side benefit. Plus, the price was not high, and they did not have to pay a dime for the carriage, so they were not too resistant to buying information. Because he was once such a person. A trick of a mouse. A well-dressed man sneered. Unfortunately, he's not even as courageous as a mouse. Give him a silver royal. Soon, someone beside him handed him the money. He actually brought an entourage. Looks like he's a noble. White smiled fawningly, but he didn't think much of it. How could a noble be so poor that he didn't even have a carriage, and had to squeeze into a carriage with a commoner? This is my share. The other young man hesitated for a moment, before he took out a silver royal from his pocket. Only 2 people are willing to pay? Vanera stopped the carriage and waited for a while. Seeing that no one else said anything, he decided to open the door and let the guests go. In any case, it was better than nothing. It was not a bad thing to have 2 more people on this trip. At this time, the young man said to the others, "Don't get separated. I'll tell you when I get the information. It's free." Boy, what did you say? White's face froze. I paid. The young man said confidently. It's one thing for you to tell me, but it's another thing for me to tell others. Is there anything wrong with that? You may want to go back on your word, but it won't do you any good. Even if I turn around and let all the people in the port know, it won't affect the people you're transporting. And if you don't get a silver royal, you'll suffer a real loss. What a sharp-tongued guy. White opened his mouth, but found that he did not know how to refute. Idiot, it's your freedom to do this. Can't you just keep it to yourself? The nobleman said unhappily. You have to waste each other's time. This is not a mistake. Why should I hide it? The young man said bluntly. I think it's the fairest way to let the coachman know. Fairest? The nobleman glanced at him as if he was looking at an idiot, and then turned his head disdainfully to look at White. "Hey, I don't care about this guy. I've already paid. Are you going to tell me or not?" White glared at the young man and had to admit that the young man was right. Okay, I'll be generous this time. Really. Don't get off the carriage. You can stay here and listen to me." Then he roughly told them what he had heard, such as which people Grey Castle favored, the arrangements for evacuating by ship, the things to pay attention to when queuing up and registering, and the second inspection after arriving at the destination. Especially the point of comparison. As long as the people in front entered the port, they would naturally notice the speech of the First Army's guide. And he just summarized a few key points. But the latter was the valuable information he had obtained from chatting with the soldiers. According to the people of Grey Castle, witches would participate in the inspection, and any lies would be exposed. Once the registered identity did not match the reality, they would be labeled as dishonest, and it would be much more difficult for them to find a decent job. In addition, the identity of a noble not only did not help to improve their treatment, but it would also annoy people if they kept talking about it, so it was best to just say one sentence. As long as they could read and write, or had a skill, they basically did not have to worry about their future. "Thank you for your reminder." When they got off the carriage, the young man was the last to leave. "It really saves us a lot of detours." You're welcome. Anyway, you bought it with money." White angrily lit his pipe and took a deep breath. "As for those people, they should be thanking you." But they all scattered as soon as they got off the carriage. Boy, don't always think of yourself as a good person, especially outside. Otherwise, sooner or later, you'll suffer a lot. He himself was the same. What he got in return was nothing but a cold, fake leg. Maybe, but this is the duty of a knight. Do you think I haven't seen a knight? Or are you referring to the descriptions in the ancient books? Come on, the last time I heard of it was from the mouth of a mouse in a tavern. Everyone is like this, but it doesn't mean it's right. Oh. Seeing that he was so serious, White raised his eyebrows. You're a knight? No, I haven't been conferred a title. My father is, but he's already. So that's how it is. Another hothead with empty dreams, and it seems that he's even worse off than the previous guy. He waved his hand. I'm not interested in your family background. By the way, what's your name? The young man immediately raised his head. Manfeld Castian. Chapter 1250. After the carriage left, Manfeld found that, just as the coachman had said, no one stayed behind to wait for him. Everyone had left, and the crowd around him was full of unfamiliar faces. However, he did not feel too depressed. He did not do those things for the sake of gratitude, but because he thought it was the right thing to do. Based on the information provided by the coachman, Manfeld soon found the registration office of the Grey Castle people. In fact, the area was not only full of banners, but also full of people shouting. It was hard not to notice. Despite the large number of people, the order of the scene did not appear chaotic. Iron railings divided the crowd into several folded groups. It seemed that the distance from the entrance to the registration desk had been artificially extended, but this also meant that people could only move forward one by one according to the path defined by the railings. When it was Manfeld's turn, a Grey Castle man dressed like a soldier received him. These outsiders were all wearing the same uniform, so it was easy to recognize them. Name: Manfeld Castian. Identity: did you commit any crimes? What's your specialty? Just like what the coachman had said, Manfeld answered all the questions truthfully and skipped over his family background. When he was about to elaborate on his specialties, the soldier interrupted him after hearing that he could read and write. That's enough. Get on the boat at pier number 6. This is your registration number plate. Don't lose it. Next. Before Manfeld realized what had happened, he was squeezed out of the queue and entered the dock area. That's it. Is it really like what the coachman said? Can one live a comfortable life in Grey Castle just because he can read and write? But judging from the situation at the registration desk, it seems that any Grey Castle man can read and write. While waiting in line, Manfeld noticed that the scribes had changed several times. Sometimes, they even found a temporary soldier to supervise the order, But nothing went wrong. This situation puzzled him a little. Moreover, the plate given to him by the Grey Castle man seemed to contain some secret. It was an iron plate with a hemp rope hanging on one end, which could be worn as a necklace. There were a series of symbols engraved on the plate, which were probably related to his registration number. It wouldn't cost much to hire a blacksmith to make such a small metal plate, but it would be a completely different story if it were to be used by the entire group of migrants. Castian's family had a blacksmith shop in the past, so he knew what that meant. A piece of iron plate could be made from the scraps left over from forging, but 100 pieces or 1,000 pieces could not be made. Engraving the symbol would take half a day, but repeating it 100 or 1,000 times would take a long time. However, there were more than 1,000 people on the pier. If the sedimentation bay was like this every day, it would be an understatement to say that there were tens of thousands of them. And to prepare a registration card like this for all the migrants? The materials and time required were far beyond his imagination. Even if he gathered all the blacksmiths in the kingdom of Wolfheart, it would still be impossible. This alone made him realize the wealth and luxury of the kingdom of Grey Castle. In the past, this title belonged to the kingdom of Dawn. With these thoughts in mind, Manfeld boarded a 3-masted ship. He didn't know if it was because of his specialty, but he was assigned to a cabin for 10 people. It was much better than he had expected to sleep in the cargo hold. Even so, he could not stand the pungent smell in the cabin. No matter how poor his family was, they could at least provide him with a comfortable bedroom. Therefore, he only stayed for a short while before he escaped in a panic. When he was about to go to the deck to get some fresh air, he suddenly heard a soft cry for help. It seemed to come from the end of the corridor. At this time, there were not many people boarding the ship. The sailors were busy on the upper deck, so the cabin was somewhat empty. Except for Manfeld. No one else had heard the cry for help. Without hesitation, Manfeld walked toward the source of the cry. At the end of the corridor was a storeroom. Except for the crew, few people would come to such a place. He gently pressed his ear against the door, and sure enough, he heard some strange noises, as if someone was struggling. He decisively took 2 steps back, lowered his shoulders, and slammed open the door. Manfeld was taken aback by what he saw. The man standing in the storeroom was the middle-aged nobleman who had been on the carriage with him, and mocked him for his stupidity. 2 of his attendants were pressing 2 women to the ground, and trying to tie their hands and feet with ropes. The women's mouths were stuffed with a piece of linen cloth, and they could only mumble in a low voice. Apparently, they were brought here by force. "Oh, aren't you a fool who pretends to be fair?" The nobleman said calmly. "If I'm not mistaken, you're also a noble, right? My name is Mac McKinley. What about you?" Manfeld Castian. This was the 3rd time that Manfeld had said his name in a day. He noticed that the moment he revealed his identity, the woman's eyes, which had just lit up with hope, suddenly dimmed, and even her struggle became much weaker. "Castian? I've never heard of him." The man shrugged. "But you're lucky. Since you've met me, I'll let you have some fun. But you'll have to wait after me." "Let them go," Manfeld said in a low voice. "Huh." Mac McKinley narrowed his eyes. "Is there something wrong with you? Do you know who they are?" "Slaves. And they've been played by countless people. At first, I thought I was mistaken. I didn't expect to meet these 2 little things on the ship. As far as I know, their owner would never let them go. So it's simple. They escaped without permission. Even so, you still want to protect them?" Even among the slaves, escaped slaves were the lowest kind, almost no different from livestock. No matter what the nobleman did to them, they would not be blamed. But it was just as he had said before. Everyone is like this, but it doesn't mean it's right. The destination of this ship is Grey Castle, right? "What are you trying to say?" Mac McKinley said with a gloomy face. "You must have heard the propaganda of Grey Castle. The royal family of Wimbledon has abolished slavery. So from the moment they boarded this ship, they were no longer slaves," Manfeld said. "And don't forget, after we disembark, there will be a round of investigation, which includes criminal records. If I tell them, do you think the people of Grey Castle will pretend nothing happened?" "What if I insist?" the man asked through clenched teeth. "Then beat me first. Manfeld said, rolling up his sleeves. I'm a knight. Before he could finish, Mac McKinley's men had already pounced on him. The outcome of the battle was quickly decided. Apparently, the man's guards were well trained. In the narrow storeroom, Manfeld lost the ability to fight back in less than 10 moves. When he fell to the ground with a swollen face, Mac McKinley came up and gave him a couple of kicks. You want to act cool with your skills? I thought you were as good as your mouth. The middle-aged nobleman spat on the ground. Damn it. You ruined my mood. Since you like to protect these two bitches, I'll let you have them. But don't forget, slaves are slaves. It's the same no matter where they go. It's so unlucky to meet such an idiot. Let's go. Chapter 1251. It took Manfeld quite a while to recover from the dizziness. His vision was blurry, and his face was burning. It was difficult for him to open his eyes. Damn it. Didn't they say that nobles should not hit their faces in a fight? With great effort, he slowly sat up from the ground and slowly moved toward the two terrified women. He pulled out the rags from their mouths. Don't be afraid. I'll untie you after I catch my breath. The two women did not even dare to breathe heavily. They only nodded slightly. This time, he paused for a longer time before he gathered enough strength to loosen the ropes. Okay, you can go now. Just be careful not to be caught by that guy again. That guy should not have a chance. When the ship left the port with a full load of people, he would run into migrants everywhere he went. That guy probably did not have the guts to do this in front of everyone. The two women carefully walked around him and quickly ran out of the storeroom. Their hurried footsteps gradually faded away, and finally, silence. From the beginning to the end, they still did not say a word, not even a word of thanks. Manfeld leaned against the wall and let out a sigh. For some reason, the words of the coachman suddenly came to his mind. Boy, don't always think of yourself as a good guy, especially when you're outside. Otherwise, sooner or later, you'll suffer a lot. He shook his head and threw these distracting thoughts to the back of his mind. He was already used to this kind of situation, wasn't he? Now, he only hoped that he could return to his assigned cabin before the official departure, so that his bed would not be occupied. Suddenly, Manfeld heard footsteps again, accompanied by the creaking of the wooden planks. The footsteps were approaching him. Damn it, don't tell me that Mike McKinley hasn't had enough? The footsteps stopped at the door of the storeroom. Then, the door was pushed open a little, and a head poked in. Manfeld was stunned. It was one of the women who had escaped. When the door opened, he found that both of them were there. The one standing in the back was carrying a wooden bucket with difficulty. Her movements were so stiff that it seemed that she had exerted all her strength. It was not until she placed the bucket in front of him that he noticed that it was filled with water. One of them took out a handkerchief and wiped the blood on his face. The other one kept apologizing. I'm so sorry that you were beaten up like this. We were so scared that we didn't dare to say a word. Because you said you were also a noble. Manfeld could not help laughing. Even though his body was stinging, he did not want to control his expression. Oh, what's wrong? Didn't I tell you? From the moment we boarded the ship, there was no longer any difference between slaves and nobles. Because the king of Grey Castle not only abolished the slave status, but also took back all the nobles' rights. In other words, we are the same people. Indeed, Manfeld knew that there were no more knights in the kingdom of Grey Castle. Merchants from all over the kingdom of Wolfheart had already spread the news to the kingdom of Wolfheart. In the eyes of most nobles, this was an act of treason, which made him pay more attention to Wimbledon. Ever since his family fell behind, a question had been lingering in his mind. What exactly was a knight? When his father was still alive, he had never considered this question. He had thought that it was only a matter of time before he inherited the title of knight. However, when his territory was annexed by various factions, Manfeld found that things had changed beyond his expectations. The new lord turned a blind eye to him, and those who were obviously not qualified to be his lord became superior. Other than his surname, he seemed to have nothing. According to the ancient books, the ancestors of the pioneers chose the most outstanding representative to be the king. The king would then grant the most outstanding representative a position, an honor to protect the homeland and the people. This was the origin of the title of nobility. As the person closest to the bottom of society, the knight should be humble and compassionate. At the same time, he should uphold justice and integrity. Only in this way could his territory prosper. It was because of these qualities that ordinary people did not have that they were more noble. This was also what Manfeld had always wanted to be. However, he did not understand how a knight was different from an ordinary person without a land. Was it those extraordinary spirits that represented their loftiness? Or was it a title deed? In the struggle for power and interests, the territories of the lords changed every day. Among the people he knew, a lame person could be a knight, and an idiot could be a knight. However, Manfeld, who did not have a land, could not be a knight. This made him suspicious of the so-called knight class. Although his family had suffered many setbacks since its decline, Manfeld's goal had never changed. He had long wanted to go to Grey Castle, but he lacked the travel money. Later, when the people of Grey Castle took the initiative to enter the kingdom of Wolfheart, he found a good opportunity to go to Grey Castle. He wanted to know if it was possible to become a knight in a place where nobles no longer existed. Hearing the words "were the same," the two women were visibly relieved. Is that true? It's been known among the nobles for months. Those big families all want to say that Wimbledon is the devil from hell, Manfeld said with a forced smile. Manfeld forced a smile. But now, I'm afraid they're all going to seek refuge with the most dreadful demon. The one who wiped his face fell silent for a moment and asked, "Why do you want to help us? Aren't you afraid that the noble? He won't dare to kill us, because I've already warned him." Manfeld shook his head. "I don't know how the people of Grey Castle will investigate the case, but I heard that witches are involved, so it's impossible for them to lie. Even if he doesn't think it's a crime to humiliate you, killing another noble is a crime that he can't ignore. He knows it." He paused for a moment and said, "By the way, I'm Manfeld Castian. What about you?" This was the fourth time that he had told them his name today. "I'm Thylane," the one said in a low voice. "She's Momo." She paused for a moment as if she was making up her mind. What the noble said was true. We were sold to. As I said, that was before we boarded the ship. It's okay if you don't mention it. Manfeld waved his hand. Just like the coachman said, no matter how we used to live, we'll have a new life in the future. Otherwise, we wouldn't have left the kingdom of Wolfheart for a strange place, would we? Woo! At this moment, the long and deep sound of a bugle horn rang out. It was almost time to set sail. Let's go back. We'll be in trouble if someone else takes our place. He struggled to stand up. Although his body was still aching, he could still walk back to his cabin. Me too. I don't want to sleep in the storeroom on such a long journey. The two women exchanged a look. After a moment of hesitation, Thylane took out a white pill from her pocket and handed it to him. It's a medicine that can slow down pain, Thylane said. If you can't bear the pain anymore, lick it or take a small piece. But don't take too much at once, because it can only delay the pain, but can't eliminate it. Manfeld took the pill with a puzzled look. It could only delay pain instead of stop it. Was there such a miraculous medicine in this world? Without further explanation, Thylane and Momo left the storeroom with the buckets. This time, the two of them stopped at the door and bowed deeply to him. "Thank you, Mr. Castian." Manfeld heaved a sigh of relief. Not everyone was the same, was it? That was enough. He looked at the pill in his hand for a while, and tried to lick it. A faint sweetness spread from the tip of his tongue. Was this a ball made of wheat flour? Or maybe it was a little honey. Perhaps it was just a placebo stolen from the nobleman who bought her. However, the moment this thought popped up in his mind, something incredible happened. Chapter 1252. Grey Castle, City of Neverwinter. Within a week, the First Army continuously sent back intelligence that not only confirmed the appearance of the red mist in the north of Everwinter, but also gave Roland a general understanding of the evacuation situation. Just as Edith predicted, the demons did not wait for the red mist to completely disperse before invading the kingdom of Everwinter. They took advantage of the shortening of the supply line to attack the humans from multiple directions, and even clashed with the migrating troops of the First Army. Evidently, they had been waiting for this moment for a long time. According to the statistics obtained from Iron Axe, the outcome of the battle was not optimistic. In the process of evacuating the refugees, several units were suddenly defeated by the sudden attacks, and the retreat turned into a rout. The soldiers were also scattered by the panicked citizens. Currently, the confirmed number of casualties had exceeded 300, almost equivalent to the casualties of the night attack during the expedition to Tequila. Furthermore, the number of refugees exceeded 10,000, and it could be said to be a heavy loss. The swift movements of the enemy had clearly caught everyone off guard. Although it was more efficient to break up the advanced troops of the First Army to evacuate the population, it also reduced their combat ability. Fortunately, Roland had long ago instilled in the army the idea of preserving their strength as much as possible, and that the grassroots officers and soldiers who failed should not be punished. The defeated soldiers did not turn to become soldiers or bandits, and instead retreated into the kingdom of Wolfheart one after another, reconnecting with the garrison. Otherwise, according to the previous situation where the command system could no longer be called back, the army in the north of Everwinter would probably be completely wiped out. Not only could these escaped soldiers quickly form a new fighting force, but they also brought extremely important intelligence to the command center. For example, many units reported that they had discovered monstrous beasts that were not recorded in the manual during the battle. A unit that successfully evacuated from the northernmost port of Everwinter mentioned that the demons had used a new type of spider-like monstrous beast during the attack. Its defensive ability was much stronger than the previous two types. Mortars and anti-demon grenades were unable to paralyze its movements, and only 152 mm long song cannons could cause effective damage. As for the other types of monstrous beasts, there were only descriptions of their appearances, and their specific abilities were unknown. The war was undoubtedly speeding up the maturity of these monstrous beasts. With the support of the intelligence, several high-level meetings were held, and all the ministers agreed to send out the army to stop the enemy as soon as possible, so as to buy time for the evacuation of the two countries. After all, the population of Neverwinter was growing rapidly, and there were more and more workers, which gave the officials a taste of the benefits, except for the police department and the security bureau. Roland also thought so. Unfortunately, Greycastle's transport capacity had reached its limit. He wanted to send tens of thousands of people to the kingdom of Wolfheart in one go, but it would be useless if his ammunition and equipment could not keep up. Therefore, even though the order had been issued, it was still a long process to assemble the troops. This was different from the Tequila expedition. The Tequila expedition had been following the railway from the beginning, and no matter where they went, they had to rely on the Black River train and leaf to supply them. Now, before the new transportation equipment was deployed, the general staff had to think of other ways. There was another point in the report that caught his attention. The squad that had successfully evacuated previously was only able to escape unscathed because of the support of the shallow water gunboat. The reason why the Roland could arrive in time was because Zoe and Carol had temporarily abandoned their priceless magic power core for the sake of ordinary people. This change in perspective made Roland realize that the ancient witches might be able to make the relics of the underground civilization play a greater role. He directly went to the three senior witches of Tequila. Through the light screen, Pasha, Aletheia, and Celine's tentacle-covered bodies appeared on the wall of the office. Roland briefly stated his idea. "You mean to use the instrument of divine retribution as an ability converter?" Celine was the first one to speak. Not just the instrument of divine retribution, but all the magic power cores. Roland nodded. In theory, as long as the cyclone structure of the core was adjusted, it could imitate the abilities of most witches. There were a total of 4 Tequila artifacts excavated from the ruins, and the largest one was the most special. Its core cyclone was extremely complicated. According to the deciphered records, it was also a secret weapon that the underground civilization had high hopes for. The ancient witches named it the Instrument of Divine Retribution. However, only the so-called Chosen One could activate the Instrument of Divine Retribution, and the only one who seemed qualified, Roland, did not have magic power. Therefore, it had been placed in the underground hall and did nothing. If the core could be changed into other more useful abilities, it would obviously be better than leaving it to collect dust. The only problem was that the magic cores could not be replicated. Losing one meant losing one. For the surviving ancient witches, the magic cores were the direct cause of the division between Tequila and Starfall City. Many members of the Union had sacrificed their lives for them. The significance of this was self-evident. As early as the beginning of the alliance, Roland had promised that he would not force them to hand over the magic power cores. Even now that the Tequila witches had sworn their loyalty to him, he still intended to obtain their unanimous consent through negotiation. Aletheia was a little hesitant. If it were in the third border city, Your Majesty, you could use it however you want. But if it is transported outside the cave, what if it is damaged? Even Aletheia, who was usually the toughest, did not immediately object, which made Roland feel that there was a chance. He struck while the iron was hot and said, "Strict protection and supervision are necessary measures. The damage from outsiders can basically be eliminated, but the wear and tear caused by the large number of uses is inevitable, but it's better than leaving it empty and useless now." Aletheia looked at Celine. How long will it take to transform the instrument of divine retribution into another instrument, and then back? I think about a few decades, Celine estimated. After all, its core cyclone is too complicated. If we add the wear and tear, it is very likely that it will never be able to transform back to the form of divine retribution. But I still agree with Your Majesty. But that kind of magic power core can at least contribute to the defeat of the demons, Pasha echoed. Now we don't need to find the chosen one. Aletheia was silent for a while. Well, since you all agree, let's do it. For a moment, Roland seemed to see Celine pointing her main tentacle at him. How is it? My persuasion is very effective, right? Obviously, this was a private conversation. Before he could think of what to say, Celine's next words came to him. Next time, let more witches from the Quest Society enter the dream world, Your Majesty. It seemed that this was also a kind of bribe. Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry. So, Celine pretended to be indifferent and said in a normal tone, although it was difficult to see any changes in their expressions and demeanor on the original carrier. What kind of ability do you plan to transform the instrument of divine retribution into? He was already prepared for this question. Mystery Moon's magnetic power shouldn't be too complicated, right? Chapter 1253. The reason for choosing Mystery Moon was simple. Compared with the summoning ability, the enchantment ability was more suitable for the magic core. For example, Anna's black fire could not be controlled as freely as Anna could, even if she had the corresponding cyclone core. The latter was not so troublesome. Roland only needed to inject magic power and activate the device. Among the two, the magnetization ability was the most beneficial to Neverwinter. Donna had always been a scarce resource. Even with the help of Doris demonization, it could only be said to be barely enough. If the scale of the factory was to be expanded in the future, the power supply would immediately fall into a state of shortage. Moreover, power generation and transmission and transformation were extremely complicated and huge subjects. They were not inferior to mechanical majors at all. It was fine for him to use his middle school knowledge to make electric motors and light bulbs, but to build a reliable power grid was a little difficult for him. In fact, he had brought a lot of electricity textbooks from the dream world, but he found that he could not understand them at all. The content could even be summed up as, "I know every word, but I have no idea what they mean when they are put together." Instead of learning from the beginning, it was better to put his hope on the Tequila witches. Perhaps in a decade or two, they would be able to shine in various industries, but now it was almost impossible for Neverwinter to make up for this. Therefore, it was particularly important to expand the production of Dawn Eye. As long as the factory had electricity, it could produce overnight. And as long as the residential area had electricity, people could work during the day and study at night. In a sense, the power system could also be regarded as a time device. Celine said that it was not technically difficult. The original carrier's perception of magic power was far superior to that of human beings. Ordinary witches could only determine the type and level of magic power of the person being observed with the stone of measuring, but in her mind, she could form the structure of the cyclone. As long as Mystery Moon used her ability a few times in front of her, she would be able to do it. However, when Roland informed Mystery Moon, the little girl expressed a rare hint of resistance. She pouted and said, "If a magic core can replace me, then will you not want me anymore?" Finally, under Roland's coaxing, she finally agreed. And the core that could imitate the magnetization ability was named after her, the Mystery Moon instrument. In Roland's words, she said, "In this way, even if you abandon me, you'll still remember my name. Also, to make up for my broken heart, can you give me 2 more bottles of chaos drinks?" Then she was dragged away by Lily, who was accompanying her. It took a few days to adjust the magic power core, and it was the same for designing a DC power grid that covered the entire city. Although he only used the most basic knowledge of series and parallel connections, and tried to simplify the calculation by introducing as much dawn power as possible, it still exhausted Roland. During this period, a group of unexpected visitors came to Neverwinter. Rex, together with a dozen members of the Society of Wondrous Crafts, submitted a letter to the King of Grey Castle. Roland soon met this group of unconventional explorers from the fjords in the living room. "I thought you wouldn't come." He asked the attendants to serve tea and desserts, and he spoke unhurriedly. It had been more than 3 months since the Fjords people and the Sand Nation people left Neverwinter. If it were not for the piles of relics that were transported to the southernmost region from time to time, he would have almost forgotten about it. At the same time, Roland was also carefully sizing up this group of people. Probably because of the long journey across the sea, they all looked a little haggard. It seemed that in the fjords, only those who could not get on the ship would choose to take another route. "I'm sorry, Your Majesty," Rex said apologetically. "It took me too much time to gather the other members of the Society of Wondrous Crafts. Unfortunately, my ability is limited. Although you gave me a book as a proof, many people still have doubts and are unwilling to share their research results. Especially when I mentioned that you invented a machine that can send people into the sky. They think I'm under the same spell as Fan. What about these people? They're all willing to believe you, Your Majesty." Rex bowed and said, "This time, they've all brought their families and are ready to settle in Neverwinter for a long time. They've also completely accepted your conditions." "Very good." Roland took a sip of tea and said, "After you pass the examination of the administrative office, you'll be considered as Grey Castle's subjects. After all, joining the Society of Wondrous Crafts was something that the people of the fjords had no choice but to do. There was bound to be a mixture of good and bad people. If they could not understand the value of the knowledge in the book, there was basically no value in recruiting them. What does the examination mean? The established procedures to become an official member of Grey Castle is mainly to record your identity information. Don't worry, there's no need to sign a contract or anything like that." The crowd immediately heaved a sigh of relief. It was obvious that although they had brought their families, they were still full of anxiety about the future. Perhaps he should give them more confidence. Roland summoned his personal guard Sean. "Your Majesty, what can I do for you? These people are our new guests. Show them around and let them familiarize themselves with the new King's City of Grey Castle." Roland spread out his hands and said, "Especially the Miracle Building. If the new Invention Association is established, it'll also have an office on the top floor like the other schools of the Philosopher's Study. So, there's no harm in learning about it now." "Yes, Your Majesty." Seeing that everyone was confused and followed Sean away, Roland held back his laughter and whispered to Nightingale, "Follow them and have a look." 2 hours later, Nightingale returned to the office. "How was it?" Roland poured her a cup of chaos drink. "You've already guessed it, haven't you?" She curled her lips and drank the drink in one gulp. "Really, you're just like a kid showing off his toys. Don't worry, I think even if you drive them away, they won't leave." "Don't say that. I just want to give them a little confidence." Nightingale rolled her eyes at him. "Ahem, okay, you're a little bit right. You're quick to admit it." She unceremoniously extended the empty cup to Roland. Do you want to hear more details? Yes, Roland admitted honestly, having learned a lesson from his previous experience. Then prepare 2 more bottles of chaos drink. As the landmark building of Neverwinter, one could see more than half of the city from the top of the building, including the North Slope mountain mine, which always emitted thick smoke, and the Redwater River, which was filled with all kinds of cement boats. Between the two, trains loaded with raw materials rumbled through the city, and a bit further south, the figures of biplanes would often inadvertently streak across the sky. If it was at night, one could even see the brightly lit factories by the river. The light from the windows was reflected on the river like twinkling stars. The story was exactly as he had imagined. For those who had never seen such a scene, the moment they reached the top of the building, it meant the arrival of a new world. Chapter 1254. That night, when Roland told Anna about it, she laughed for a long time. If those people knew that most of these things were written by you, I'm afraid their eyes would fall out of their sockets. He played with Anna's hair and said casually, in this way, they should also be obedient to you. Finally, the Ministry of Industry can hire more people, Anna said with a smile. I just don't know how good they are. They can recognize the value of that book. At least they are talented. Roland shrugged. Years ago, he had deceived the chief alchemist to come to Neverwinter with a row of redox formulas. And they are willing to bring their families here under pressure, so they must be very curious. With these 2 conditions, as long as they are given the right opportunity, I think they will become famous. He paused and said, of course before they officially help you, they have to finish learning those basic subjects. You can arrange how to do it. This is also a process of establishing a superior and subordinate relationship. Anna leaned closer to him and rested her head on his chest. To be honest, I don't know if I can lead them well. You were the one who proposed to be the Minister of Industry, Roland teased. Now that you're finally not a general without an army, are you afraid? She stretched out her hand, and a slender blackfire quietly appeared on her fingertips. She drew a circle in front of Roland and said, do you want to be tied up and tickled by blackfire again? I mean if there's anything you don't understand, you can ask Tilly. Roland looked away. I heard that all the trainee air knight in the academy are afraid of the Princess Royal's majesty. Anna's eyes lit up. Yes, I can ask your sister for advice. But she hesitated. I haven't talked to her for a long time. And I heard that since the last expedition, her mood has been. Don't worry. It's been so long, she must have adjusted. Roland comforted her. Maybe she'll be very happy if you go and chat with her. After all, you used to do the exam together. Regarding the possibility of resurrection of ashes, he did not reveal it to anyone other than Tilly. The main reason was that he was worried that they would disregard life and death in the war. Okay. Anna nodded as if she had made up her mind. It's settled then. Seeing that the crisis had been resolved, Roland changed the topic. By the way, how's the steam truck project going? The first prototype will take a few more days to complete. The structure is similar to the previous Rubik's Cube car, but the control and power system have been simplified. Although the flexibility has decreased a lot, the reliability has increased a lot. When it came to business, Anna's tone immediately became serious. Besides, using it to carry goods and people is not a problem, provided that the road project you mentioned can be completed smoothly. If it's just an ordinary dirt road or mountain road, it basically can't run. What about the tractor? That's far from it. Anna shook her head. The drawings you gave me are not detailed enough. There are many parts that need to be done in practice. Moreover, the suspension and control system are different from those of wheeled vehicles. I'm afraid it'll take a long time to build a qualified prototype. However, what they lacked the most now was time. If they only relied on defense, the demons would only become more and more difficult to deal with. To get rid of the dependence on land warfare, armored troops were undoubtedly the best choice. However, it was not easy to collect the drawings of such old large-scale machinery. Unlike the ready-made products in textbooks, even in the dream world, he could only find some scattered detailed drawings of the parts. Not to mention that they were not accurate, It was also doubtful whether they could match each other. If they directly used modern parts, Neverwinter's technological level was far from up to standard. Whether it was the tracked tractor or the armored vehicles modified on this basis, they were all consumables. He could not let Anna build all of them. In the end, there were too few people available. When the industry developed to a certain level, any product could involve hundreds of categories, and it would be difficult to rely on one or two people to support the overall situation. This problem would become more and more obvious in the future. For example, Tilly had given him feedback on the shortcomings of the biplane and suggestions for improvement, but he had no time to deal with all of them. If the Third Battle of Divine Will came 50 years later, all of these problems could be easily solved. However, the enemies obviously would not give him this opportunity. "I'll think of another way," Roland said slowly. "Roland, I remember you said that the dream world is getting richer and richer, right?" Anna blinked her lake blue eyes as if she had come up with an idea. "Yes, it seems to be improving itself. If not, I wouldn't have been able to bring back the following materials." According to Lon, this was a manifestation of the dream world strengthening itself. It was eroding the power of the gods. In that case, why don't you directly seek help from the dream world? You mean to mobilize more people to search? No, Anna said with a sly smile. I'm thinking of a more direct way. She whispered her idea into Roland's ear. I just don't know if it will work. Roland could not help but be startled. He pondered for a moment, and the more he thought, the more excited he became. This may work. You can try it later. Anna stretched. If it works, we'll all be much more relaxed. But for now, accompany me first. When Roland opened his eyes from the dream world, a complete plan had already emerged in his mind. Anna's idea was actually not complicated. Since Neverwinter lacked enough talents, they might as well recruit from here. After receiving this hint, Roland thought more deeply. He could set up his own design bureau in the dream world. Nominally, he would spend money to have fun. After all, antique and model enthusiasts were everywhere. No matter what he did, he would not attract any attention. In fact, he could provide research and development support and detailed drawings for the real world. He could even carry out follow-up tests and improvements here. Compared to searching for information on the internet like looking for a needle in a haystack, this method was undoubtedly more targeted and much more efficient. However, the threshold for doing this was undoubtedly very high. It was so high that the money he had accumulated from robbing fallen evils was far from enough. Unless he could find a more powerful supporter. And now there seemed to be one. One of the members of the board of directors of the Clover Group, Garcia's father, Guard. Of course, given Guard's personality, it was very likely that he would not achieve the result he wanted. After all, for Guard, even if the cost was not large, he would not give it up so easily. It was difficult for Garcia to help him in this matter, so he needed some other bargaining chips. Chapter 1255. Hello, Mr. Roland. Rock's calm voice came from the other end of the line. I didn't expect you to call me so early. Is there anything urgent? Upon hearing Rock's words, Roland realized that it was only 7 o'clock in the morning. He felt a little embarrassed and said, Sorry, did I wake you up? I'm in some trouble and may need the association's help. It has nothing to do with the fallen evils, but it's really important. It's okay, Rock said calmly. Sleeping for a long time is just a habit of the body. For an awakened at my age, I spend most of the day with my eyes open. If there's any trouble, just tell me. Recently, he had been very active in the eyes of the Martialist Association's higher-ups. Not only was he the most active in dealing with the fallen evils, but he was also one of the best. He was only inferior to the Crusade group led by the two Guardians, and the Star team led by Fei Yuhan. More importantly, compared to other martialists, he always acted alone. Such a high efficiency in eliminating the fallen evils had greatly boosted the reputation of the conservative faction, and made him as influential as the higher-ups. Of course, this was the result of Roland's best efforts to conceal his achievements. Most of the fallen cores had disintegrated and returned to the dream world. He never hunted fallen evils alone. Every time he took action, he would be followed by a large group of tequila witches. In the face of all kinds of strange abilities, the fallen evils could hardly fight back. In any case, his performance quickly spread among the higher-ups. Now, not only could he freely enter the various facilities of the Martialist Association, but he was also equipped with a phone that allowed him to directly contact the Guardians. Before that, I want to ask you a question. What's the relationship between the Prism City and the Clover Group? Roland remembered that Garcia had told him that her father had participated in the construction of the Prism City. Simply put, it's a long-term cooperative relationship, Rock replied. Of course, we maintain close cooperation with many companies. After all, the operation of the association requires a lot of resources. In other words, we're considered influential clients? You can say so. That's good. Roland quickly explained his needs. There was a rare silence on the other end of the phone. After a while, the other party replied hesitantly, "There's no problem with that, but is it really that important to you?" "It is the same for this world." Roland tried his best to sound as sincere as possible. Even if Nightingale were to come to the dream world, she would not be able to tell that he was lying. If the humans were to fall into a disadvantageous situation in the battle of divine will, he would not be able to escape either. If that really happened, the time in the dream world would also be frozen, and he would be forever frozen in the realm of mind. All right, I understand. Rock didn't argue any further. No matter what, the association is grateful for your efforts. If you hadn't stepped forward bravely, there wouldn't have been so many young people who decided to stay, and our situation would have been even more difficult. Hearing the Guardian's honest reply, Roland was inexplicably touched. Although his reason for killing the fallen evils was very different from the association's, the Guardian's gratitude was genuine. Perhaps, as Lon had said for the fallen evils, this world was all there was to them. Roland wanted to say something like, "It's nothing, it's what I should do," but he unconsciously said something else instead. "I'll protect this place." After hanging up the phone, Roland first saw Zero out. Although she had awakened the force of nature on the day of the erosion of the modern world, she still had to go to school. Moreover, Saint Milan, Dodo, and Ling were all in the same school as Zero, so there was no need to worry about the fallen evils. Roland then went to the Rose Café. Since he had contacted Lon, the cafe had never officially opened for business. The shutter gate was always closed. Only by entering the cafe from the side door of the warehouse could one see the other side of the cafe. No matter what time of day it was, the cafe was always bustling. For example, at this moment, the witches were preparing their own breakfast. As soon as they opened the door, an alluring barbecue smell wafted into Roland's nose. After enjoying a sumptuous meal and informing them of their free time, Roland drove the van and left the apartment. The headquarters of the Clover Group was in the center of the city, so Roland soon arrived at his destination. Since he had already informed the association beforehand, this time, before he could reveal his identity, someone had already taken him upstairs. The elevator finally stopped on the 100th floor. Roland walked into a spacious office surrounded by floor-to-ceiling glass windows. He had a new understanding of the financial resources of the Clover Group. "We meet again, Mr. Roland." Guard took the initiative to shake hands with him. "I didn't expect that in such a short time. You've risen from a newbie martialist to a figure valued by the association's defender. You're really impressive." "So polite?" Guard had not paid much attention to him when he took out his hunting license. As expected, compared with personal ability, the background of a rich man was more important to a businessman. After exchanging some pleasantries, Roland went straight to the point. "Did the Rock Defender tell you why I'm here?" Guard shook his head. "Mr. Rock only said that you need help from the group, and asked us to help you as much as possible. But as you know, with the current size of the Clover Group, I can't make many decisions on my own." Guard probably meant that it was impossible for him to withdraw from the expropriation of the tube-shaped apartment. Even if he agreed, the board of directors would not approve it. Roland could not help but laugh. Guard probably thought that he was here to plead for Garcia. In fact, as long as he did not agree, no one could demolish the building under the protection of a group of witches. In addition, the Guardian's words also gave him a lot of freedom. This way of fully trusting him made him feel even better about the association. It's not too complicated, Roland said, spreading out his hands. I want to set up a small manufacturing factory, or a model factory. The main purpose is to design and manufacture some modern mechanical equipment, such as steam cars, old-fashioned tractors. The kind that will bring back memories at a glance. More riveted steam steel. Do you understand? Guard twitched the corner of his mouth and asked, to make a movie? You can think of it that way. But it's different from those props that only look good. It can actually be moved, and there are some special requirements. As far as I know, the market for this kind of thing is pathetically small. I don't plan to sell it. I just want to build one or two for fun. I don't need an assembly line or anything. This way, I can reduce a lot of costs. Guard was speechless for a long time. In his eyes, this was simply a way to lose money. I didn't know that Mr. Roland had such a hobby, Guard said after a long while. After a while, he said, in other words, do you want the Clover Group to find such a small factory and hire the relevant designers and workers? Ugh, it sounds quite difficult. Putting aside the factory, the designer must at least be an engineer with relevant experience. Even with the power of the group, it is not something that can be achieved in a short period of time. That's about it. It doesn't matter if it takes a little longer. Let me ask my secretary first. Guard returned to his desk and picked up the phone. A quarter of an hour later, the secretary called back. Guard turned to look at Roland and said, maybe there's a factory that meets your requirements. So soon? Roland was slightly surprised. Chapter 1256. Guard's so-called factory was located in a construction site in the southern suburbs of the city. Since he was traveling with the CEO of the department, Roland did not have to drive his minivan anymore. Instead, he took the opportunity to experience what it felt like to be the boss of a luxurious car. He had to admit that lying in a spacious seat that was softer than a sofa and drinking iced champagne from the refrigerator in the back was really addictive. Of course, it would be even better if the champagne was replaced by Coke. When the car drove off the flat road and onto the bumpy temporary road, the roar of machinery became endless. Trucks and excavators could be seen everywhere. Roland could see the banner Clover Construction Engineering Company, Limited, hanging on the row after row of prefab houses. Towering piles were as dense as a forest in the distance. Guard probably sensed Roland's curiosity, so he took the initiative to explain. The group plans to build a modern new energy car city here. Currently, the construction department is responsible for the construction, and when all the facilities are completed, it will be handed over to the manufacturing department. This project has been approved for a long time, and it was only implemented a few months ago. It was no wonder that Garcia had stopped protesting against the forced demolition recently. It seemed that the Clover Group had temporarily shifted its target. What about the factory? It will be demolished, Guard replied. It used to be an agricultural machinery factory. It has gone through several reforms, but in the end, it can't keep up with the needs of the times. Considering that your requirements are special, I can leave a factory for you to use. Although it's not under my management, I've already talked to them, so it's not a big deal to leave it for the time being. Is it still staffed? Compared to the site, Roland was more concerned about the professionals. Almost all of them have left, Guard said with a shrug. Only an old master who is about to retire and a dozen workers are left. They are all family members. When the car city is built, they will probably be transferred to new positions. Well, it sounds a little shabby. Roland could not help but think to himself. Nevertheless, it was better than nothing. Although it was still far from the legendary design bureau that he had expected, it was still a start. When he arrived at his destination, he lowered his expectations again. What he saw was a slightly dilapidated factory with an area of about 500 square meters. The steel plate walls were already showing signs of rust. Walking into the factory, the dust in the corners could almost make footprints. The scattered machine tools weren't much better. It was obvious that no one had taken care of them for a long time. following Guard up the stairs at the head of the factory and approaching the management room. Roland keenly heard the conversation in the room. Sigh, I don't know when the company will demolish this place. Sitting in the same place every day, my butt is going to rot. There's nothing wrong with being idle. Anyway, I won't get a raise when I'm transferred to a new company. I might even have to work overtime every day. I'd rather sit still. What are you talking about? A rather elderly voice interjected. Young people should be full of energy. Vitality can't be eaten. If I could retire and get my salary now, I promise I'd agree to it without hesitation. By the way, Master Xie, you should retire this time, right? I heard that the boss has tried to persuade you several times. In fact, even if you don't clock in now, I don't think the boss will say anything. I just don't want to leave this place. I've been here for almost 30 years. I should take one more look at this place before it's demolished. Do you want me to take a few photos for you? Brat, can photos be the same as the real thing? Wait, someone's here. Suddenly, there was a rustling sound in the room. When guard secretary opened the door, everyone in the room had returned to their original positions. Some were tidying up the documents on the table, and some were sitting in front of the computer, typing away as if they had been busy since the beginning. Mr. Guard, why are you here? Seeing Guard, everyone was stunned. Obviously, the boss they were talking about was not this member of the board of directors. It was as if a government official had suddenly come to an unknown village. I brought my friend here to visit. Guard looked at the oldest person in the crowd. You're Master Xie, right? I heard that you've been working here for decades. Roland also looked at the man. Judging from his appearance, he was about 60 years old. His hair was sparse around the top of his head, and a pair of huge reading glasses hung over his nose. He was skinny and held a thermos cup in his hand. Apart from his spirited eyes, he looked no different from the old men who came and went in the apartment complex. Perhaps the only thing that Master Xie was able to show off was his long service years. Yes, you're right. Master Xie rubbed the thermos and replied in a flattering tone. It's been 29 years since I joined the factory. All right, this temperament is also far different from those experts who have unique skills and are indifferent to everyone. Roland's expectations in his heart dropped to the bottom. It seems that I'll have to recruit people on the internet by myself. Thank you for your hard work. Guard smiled. This young friend of mine is interested in the factory. Show him around and tell him about the factory. Okay. Master Xie looked at Roland in surprise. But the factory is going to be. If he likes this place, he can keep the factory. As soon as he said this, Roland noticed that Master Xie's eyes suddenly lit up. How should I address you? Just call me Roland. Okay, Mr. Roland. Please follow me. Master Xie led him to the factory building area. When he was about to introduce the long history of the factory, Roland interrupted him. Compared to that, I'm more interested in what kind of work you've done before. Almost everything. Master Xie laughed. From a bench worker to a workshop supervisor. Later, I was the deputy director for a while. When I was busy, I had to do the work of 3 or 4 people. During the day, I arranged assembly lines, and at night, I taught the young men how to repair machines. I didn't have any free time until I couldn't see clearly. Roland stopped and asked, Have you done design before? Well, of course. Although I didn't go to a formal university, I did work night shifts in the factory, so I learned a lot by myself. But a pen and a ruler are no match for a computer. Besides, the company set up a special design department a few years ago, so people don't care about paper drawings anymore. If I want a Caterpillar tractor with different specifications and requirements from the market, can you make it? A tractor? I know it better than my wife. I'm not bragging, Mr. Roland. If I have a few apprentices, I can make it with my eyes closed. He asked in surprise. If that's the case, why didn't the Clover Group hire you to work in the design department? Alas, they can't do anything without computers nowadays. I heard that all the production lines in the new factory are automated. Mechanical arms and robots take care of most of the work, and the people in the old factory are all engaged in sales and administration. Even if they hire me, I can't do anything. Master Xie's tone revealed a hint of loneliness. However, Roland's opinion of him had changed completely. Ordinary image? Such an employee wouldn't steal the limelight. Honest temperament? Honest team members are easier to manage, aren't they? It's not a problem that they don't know how to use computers. There are so many cheap draftsmen. Good, very good. Roland couldn't help smiling and nodding. Ah. Master Xie was stunned, as if he didn't understand what was good about it. The factory won't be demolished, he said directly. I'll transform this place into a new design bureau, and you'll be my first chief designer. Design bureau? Chapter 1257. Mr. Roland, Master Xie asked after shaking hands. What is the purpose of the design bureau? To complete all the concepts I need, Roland said with a smile. For example, I want you to build a brand new tractor. It must be simple, reliable, and easy to manufacture. At the same time, it must have the potential to be modified. There should be a lot of tractors like this on the market. Of course, my requirements are more than that. The above is just the basic framework, Roland said, shaking his head. First of all, except for the engine, we have to produce all the parts ourselves. That will cost a lot, Master Xie said. It doesn't need to be mass-produced, and the price can be comparable to some handmade products. I have a few collector friends who are willing to spend a lot of money to buy them. I see. In addition, the production process can't involve automatic machine tools. Roland looked around. The tools in the factory are very suitable. I need to know the specifications and manufacturing process of each part. In other words, the design bureau not only needs to build it, but also needs to draw all the assembly lines. Seeing Master Xie's hesitant expression, he added, Of course, I will recruit some freshmen to assist you. You just need to assign them to work. That's good. If I only rely on pen and paper, I'm afraid it will take me more than half a year to figure it out. The last and most important point, Roland said. Making it requires a certain amount of imagination. Master Xie was stunned. What did you say? Let me give you an example. For example, this tractor uses steam power. So in theory, it needs a large boiler and a cabin to store fuel and water. But in fact, it doesn't have these parts. You can imagine its power source as a nuclear-powered engine, just like in the movies. Master Xie seemed to be a little stunned. Therefore, when making the prototype, we must minimize the impact of these theoretically necessary, but actually non-existent parts so that we can get the most accurate data during the test. Do you understand what I mean? Master Xie thought hard for a while before he carefully replied. Do you mean that I should design it as something that doesn't belong to this era? Full marks for this summary. Roland grinned. Are there any technical difficulties? Not in theory, but... He hesitated for a moment. To tell you the truth, even if it's built, I'm afraid it won't have any practical value. That's right. My collector friend doesn't care about those things. Master Xie breathed a sigh of relief. He then asked, Mr. Roland, I wonder how much the chief's salary is. Just double your retirement salary, Roland said with a smile. Back in the car, Guard put down his glass and shrugged. How about it? Are you satisfied? Not bad. I just don't know how to calculate the expenses of the factory. Roland pretended to be polite. Don't mention these details. It's an honor for the Clover Group to be able to help the Martialist Association. Guard waved his hand. I'll talk to them later and settle this matter. From now on, you're their new boss. It was not a big deal to keep a factory that was scheduled to be demolished. As for the fixed assets such as the land and factory, they would still belong to the Clover Group. What the Clover Group needed to pay was nothing more than the salaries of some workers, and a few processing machines that were waiting to be scrapped. It was undoubtedly a good deal to earn the favor of the guardian of the Prism Town at such a small price. If Roland wanted to collect all these on his own, he would have to spend at least tens of millions, and he might not even be able to do it. Having said that, Roland did not want to miss any opportunity to take advantage of the Clover Group. Is this really a good idea? I've thought about it. If we want the factory to resume normal operation, we'll have to hire a group of workers. In order to increase their enthusiasm, we'll have to set up a reward and punishment system, which will require a lot of money. Well, Guard thought for a moment. I'll assign a financial officer to you later. If there's any additional expenses, just let her know. But Mr. Roland, I can't ask for too much. You know the Clover Group. It's not up to you to decide. Don't worry. I won't make things difficult for you. Sending a financial officer to Roland was obviously a hedge. At least it could prevent him from burning money uncontrollably. Roland smiled and raised his glass. Thank you so much for your help. It's nothing. The two glasses clinked against each other. 3 days later, the agricultural machinery factory was officially renamed to the Greycastle Design Bureau. Although it still looked shabby, it was already very busy inside due to the temptation of a promotion and a raise. After settling this matter, Roland suddenly felt the burden on his shoulders lightened. Even his footsteps became lighter when he went to the office the next day. He could not help but feel happy when he thought that he could continue to expand the projects and scale of the Design Bureau of Greycastle, and the remaining precious design time. In this way, Anna would not have to work until midnight every day. She could devote more energy to her favorite inventions and creations, which was killing 2 birds with 1 stone. Perhaps those employees would never know that their drawings would become reality in another world, where they would fight against alien enemies in a corner of the vast and fertile continent to defend the last continuation and glory of mankind. What are you giggling about, Your Majesty? Nightingale appeared in front of him with a contemptuous look. Did you have a good time last night? You didn't do anything you shouldn't have in your dream, did you? How could I? Do I look like that kind of person? Nightingale curled her lips. Actually, it's normal. I heard from Phyllis that the ancient witches didn't care much about these things. They thought it was no different from eating and sleeping. Did she really say that? No, I lied to you. Nightingale squinted her eyes and leaned over. Were you thinking about that just now? It turned out to be a trap. I can only say that you're thinking too much. Roland glared at her. I'm so happy because I solved a big problem. It's not what you're thinking. Well, I'm 95% honest. I'm telling the truth, Nightingale said, spreading out her hands. You're now accurate to a single digit? Yes, maybe it's because I've been using it a lot. I always feel that it's much more sensitive than before. Then what's with the 5%? I'm telling you in advance I'm not lying. Maybe it's just your subconscious, Nightingale said as she raised the corner of her mouth. Roland was speechless. He had a feeling that he would be tricked by Nightingale sooner or later, so he simply stopped talking. By the way, Nightingale said after chewing the dried fish for a while, you haven't been looking at the bloody moon lately. Yeah. Roland realized that he had not looked up at the sky for a long time. The scarlet disk was still hanging high outside the window. No matter when he looked up, it was always in the same position, as if it was still. It's probably because he knows that it's just an empty hole. Just then, the phone on the desk rang. It was from the administrative office. Barov? What's up? Roland picked up the phone. Chapter 1258. Roland passed through several tightly guarded doors and entered the inner chamber of the treasury in the castle area. When he was still in Border Town, all the golden dragons were not enough to fill up a few boxes, but the basement of the castle was enough to keep the entire town running. Ever since he started selling the steam engine and other magic products, his income had increased to an astonishing level. It was not an exaggeration to say that he was raking in money every day. As the territory expanded, so did the expenses. To make it easier for the administrative office to access the funds, he ordered people to build a special treasury between the castle and the administrative office. Although it was strictly guarded, as long as the procedures were in line with the regulations, the department heads could enter the treasury to withdraw funds, which caused a heated discussion at that time. After all, almost no noble would take out all their own money to build a territory, let alone allow outsiders to enter and leave. However, at that time, apart from Barov, no one else knew that Roland did not take these hard coins seriously at all. It did not matter how many coins there were. as long as they could keep up with the needs of the city's development. For a long time, the income of Neverwinter was greater than the expenditure. It had been a long time since Roland heard the report that the savings were running low. Your Majesty. Barov, who had been waiting in the treasury, stepped forward and saluted. Look. We only have the last 12 boxes of Golden Dragon left. Generally speaking, there were about 2,000 Golden Dragons in a box, and the total amount was about 20,000. Compared to the past, when the treasury was full, it looked a little empty. As for the silver wolves and copper eagles scattered in the corner, they were piled up like small hills, but they were of little use. How long can it last? Roland asked. Based on the current trend. 2 months at most. That's faster than I thought. He raised his eyebrows. Is it mainly used on the salaries? Yes, it accounts for more than 50% of the expenses. The population is growing too fast, and the expenses of the engineering team and the smelting team are the most obvious. In addition, you need to hire a large number of ships from the Fjord's Chamber of Commerce, which costs about 4,000 to 5,000 Golden Dragon every month. If you stop this part, the administrative office will be able to hold on until the next sales share of the Joint Chamber of Commerce. You can stop everything, but you can't stop transporting people. Roland interrupted the old butler. Then, Barov rubbed his hands. I remember you said in the last meeting that there was a way to solve this once and for all. Is it true? So you haven't forgotten. Roland smiled and looked around the vault. Perhaps it was expected that such a day would come. The vault was quite spacious and clean. After removing the iron railings and the shelves in the room, it was basically no different from an ordinary house. One would not feel depressed even if they stayed for a long time. It was a good place to print money. When is the next payday? 1 week later. Store these Golden Dragon, don't touch them for the time being. He nodded. Come with me to the office. I have a new department to set up. We'll talk about the specific rules there. Although this day came earlier than expected, he had started to prepare for it more than half a year ago. The token issued to the Witch Union and sleeping spell was a test. If even the witches could not find a loophole and counterfeit the paper money, the foundation of replacing the metal currency with paper money had been established and could be put into official use at any time. Yes, Your Majesty. Barov seemed to be relieved. It was obvious that he still had a lingering fear of the days when he had no money. Now that he had obtained Roland's approval, the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes eased a little. By the way, Your Majesty, what's the name of the new department? Bank, Roland replied. 5 days later, the bulletin board in the central square of Neverwinter was replaced with a full page of new notices, which caused a great stir among the residents. The administrative office once again sent a person to give a speech, which was a rare sight after the universal education. The Grey Castle Weekly also published the details of the notice on the most eye-catching front page. His Majesty will issue new coins to replace the Golden Dragon, Silver Wolf and Bronze Eagle. For a time, the streets and alleys were filled with discussions about the currency reform. Victor's hotel was no exception. He had originally planned to return to the port of Clearwater after watching the magic movie, but the sudden appearance of the bloody moon disrupted all his plans. Panic caused the order to become unstable, so he immediately changed his plan and decided to stay here for a while. Not because of his loyalty to the King of Grey Castle, but because he believed that if the bloody moon really represented the end of the world, other places would only be worse. When the disaster came, Neverwinter was probably the safest place on the whole continent. The king and queen appeared to appease the people, and the police and garrison cracked down on crime. The order soon stabilized. As a witness of the phantom mutation, Victor was also called to investigate many times. It could be said that he was more scared than hurt. Just when he was about to get rid of the gentleness of the maids and set off for the south, he received the news of the reform. The announcement of the new policy shocked him even more than the Crimson Moon. Neverwinter was going to abolish the gold coin, the currency that had been used since the birth of the human kingdom. As a businessman, Victor's first reaction when he heard the news was that it was absolutely impossible. He thought it was the crazy words of a drunkard. In the Four Kingdoms and even overseas, as long as there were people, Gold was a precious thing. How could it be so easy to abolish it? However, the newspaper bought by the maid, as well as what he had seen and heard outside, all confirmed the authenticity of the news. The first clause of the reform was, Neverwinter will issue new paper money to replace the existing currency. It has the feature of compulsory circulation. When used according to its face value, no one can refuse to accept it. This meant that the king could use a piece of paper to buy all the goods of the merchants who stepped into the territory of Neverwinter. In a sense, it was not a problem to say that it was a robbery. When I came back, I saw some people fleeing the city with their goods, Tinkle said in a low voice while lying on the soft couch. Her tone was a little worried. Roland did not know whether she was worried that the clothes of the Rainbow Stone would be forcefully bought, or that he would run away like the others. Victor smiled bitterly. The maid did not know that he was actually closely tied to the King of Grey Castle. Without the seeds provided by Miss Leaf, there would be no Rainbow Stone today. No matter what happened, he could not easily abandon the industry in Neverwinter. Moreover, based on his understanding of Roland Wimbledon, these policies would sooner or later spread to all parts of the kingdom. In addition, the king's business acumen was not inferior to any of the big merchants in the Kingdom of Dawn. The current situation was not so bad that they had to rely on robbing to maintain the situation, so they should not suddenly have this idea. Thinking of this, Victor calmed down and continued to read. The second and third clauses were related to the livelihood of the people. Work in Neverwinter will be paid in the form of paper money. Materials sold in the administrative office and the convenience market, including but not limited to food and shelter, will only be traded in paper money. The fourth clause obviously took into account the issue of the amount of new coins. The administrative office will provide a long-term exchange service between the new and old coins. At any time, residents can exchange their Golden Dragon, Silver Royal, and Bronze Royals for paper money of the same value. They can also exchange the latter for the former. When the new coins are exchanged for the old coins, the administrative office will charge a 5% handling fee. Victor vaguely realized that there seemed to be something more hidden in this clause. The last clause seemed to be specially set up for foreign merchants. Chapter 1259. At the bottom of this clause, there was also a sample declaration form. In addition to the basic information of the merchant, it seemed that the merchant also had to indicate the sales of the goods. Victor read it carefully several times, and suddenly an idea flashed through his mind. I see. His eyes quickly moved between the fourth and fifth clause, and he gradually grasped the purpose of these two rules. Taxation. Like most cities, Neverwinter did not exempt businesses from taxes, but in fact it was not compulsory to pay taxes. He had always paid taxes according to the actual amount, but among merchants the phenomenon of tax evasion could be said to be common, and people like him were the exception. Those merchants who bought fixed shops would pay a symbolic part of the tax, while those who rented shops or traveled basically did not pay a single cent compared with the patrol team that extorted money and took bribes in the past. The stable and relaxed environment in Neverwinter was no different from trade cities such as Valencia and Eagle City, which had zero taxes. In fact, it was even better. It was this condition that allowed the new King's City to develop a prosperous market in a very short period of time. But it seemed that this situation would not last forever. Of course, the merchant could be exempted from the handling fee, but he also had to submit the source of his income. If the administrative office deducted the tax according to this, nobody could say anything. So there was no way to avoid it? Obviously there was. As long as he did not exchange the new coins for the Golden Dragon, he could directly use the proceeds to buy goods in Neverwinter, and sell them elsewhere to make up for the loss. But this was only a compensation. Victor was very familiar with this situation. No one could guarantee that the income and expenditure would be exactly equal. To maintain a business, the new coins would generally be more than the old coins. They could either go to the administrative office to exchange the new coins for the Golden Dragon, or save them for the next use. After a long time, the situation would gradually become like this. Many merchants would have a certain amount of paper money in their hands. Since it could indeed be used to buy things and was convenient to carry, merchants would sooner or later exchange it among themselves. At first, they would exchange it for gold royals, but later on, they might even use it to buy goods. This also meant that no matter which choice the merchants made, it would be beneficial to Neverwinter. However, the point was that it was not difficult to achieve this, but it was difficult to take into account the feelings of merchants. In the past, there were countless lords who were banned, but these policies of Neverwinter did not actually harm the interests of merchants. The registration could provide tax revenue for the city, thereby creating a better trade environment. Considering that legal operators often received preferential treatment from the policy, it was generally not too much of a loss. The merchants who had been holding the notes did not feel much different from before. They could still avoid the tax and spread the notes in a disguised way. As long as the goods in Neverwinter could not be replaced, the new coins would gradually occupy the position of the Golden Dragon, even if it was not under the jurisdiction of the King of Grey Castle. Victor noticed that, in fact, it wasn't just the last two clauses. The entire new policy exuded a sense of gentleness. Subtle influence was its greatest characteristic. There was no doubt that as long as the King of Grey Castle controlled the grain trade in his territory, the new currency would be valuable. Even if there were some political factors, the main reason was the vast market in Neverwinter. There was no doubt that as long as the King of Grey Castle controlled the grain trade in his territory, the new coins would definitely have value. Even if there were no lack of policy factors, the main reason was the vast market in Neverwinter. He had thought that it was a pipe dream, but now it seemed that it was not as unbelievable as he had imagined. As long as he controlled it well, King Roland Wimbledon might really be able to do it. Victor could not help but shudder as he thought about it. Replacing the Golden Dragon was just the beginning. Once everyone accepted the new coins, His Majesty would have unlimited wealth. Any business plan would seem worthless compared to it. If the news spread to the Kingdom of Dawn, the great nobles who were proud of being good at business would probably be shocked. The only problem now was whether others could imitate His Majesty's new coins. 2 days later, on the day of payment, Victor immediately asked Tinkle to buy a set of notes from the residence at 1.5 times the original price. At the first sight of it, the doubts in the jewelry merchant's heart completely disappeared without a trace. These pieces of paper are so beautiful. Tinkle could not help but exclaim as she played with a brand new note. Indeed. Victor had the same feeling. The new coins looked expensive and were very different from the notes he had imagined. They were soft and tough, which was obviously not the effect of ordinary paper. The most special thing was the patterns and patterns on them. There were 7 kinds of notes, ranging from 1,000 to 1. The largest one was equivalent to the Golden Dragon, which could also be seen from its golden patterns. The remaining ones were 500, 100, 50, 20, 10, and 1. His Majesty had replaced the original unit with the new unit of yuan. According to the different denominations, the colors and patterns were also different. For example, the front of the 1,000 note was printed with the heads of the king and queen, which looked very lifelike. The bottom was marked with the words Royal Bank of Grey Castle. Although it only occupied a small area, the outline was very clear. Upon closer inspection, one would find that both the handwriting and the portrait were pieced together by countless tiny stripes. These stripes were even thinner than a strand of hair. Yet there was no trace of contamination or adhesion between the two. Just this point alone was enough to stop others from thinking of imitating it. Victor looked at the other new coins one by one. The 500 note was printed with the Witch Union, the 100 with the factory and workers, and the rest with the new things in Neverwinter, such as the Miracle Building, the train, and so on. The back was uniformly printed with the coat of arms of Grey Castle with a high tower and 2 guns. He could not help but raise the corner of his mouth. Obviously, the patterns on the new coins were carefully designed and repeatedly considered. From the appearance, they were no different from ordinary works of art. Even if they did not have monetary value, some Fjord's collectors would be willing to spend money to collect them. This was indeed a very smart method. Printing such gorgeous notes would undoubtedly increase the cost, but it would also subconsciously increase the people's confidence. If it was just an ordinary piece of paper, it would probably be hard to believe that it could replace the Golden Dragon. However, if it was a shiny thing, the effect would be much better, even if they were not fundamentally different. Victor put down the notes and let out a long breath. What's wrong? Tinkle asked curiously. Chapter 1260. How's the exchange going these days? On the third day after the new currency was issued, Roland held a council meeting in the castle hall to discuss the feedback on the currency reform. As someone who had been through the same thing, he knew very well how difficult it was to break a tradition that had been maintained for thousands of years. Any mistake in the process could lead to an avalanche of problems. If the new currency collapsed, the administrative office, and even the prestige that he had accumulated over a long period of time would be seriously damaged. Less than expected, Your Majesty, Barav said in a relaxed tone. The exchange quota for the past 3 days is less than 1,000 golden dragon coins. Considering that the initial period of the new policy is usually the most turbulent, the Treasury should be able to meet the demand after that. In order to prevent a run on the bank, the first batch of notes was equal to the total monthly salary. Even if all the notes were exchanged, it could still last for 2 months. But if that were to happen, it would essentially mean that the plan had already failed. I think you worry too much, the old director said with a smile while stroking his beard. Exchanging the new currency for the old currency is equivalent to a loss. Most subjects won't act rashly, unless it's absolutely necessary. But we can't assume that the people have accepted the new currency just like that, Sirius Daly, the Minister of Agriculture, said cautiously. I found that the convenience market recently sold a lot more food, dried goods, and seasonings. The trade increased instead of decreased? Roland was stunned for a moment before he realized what was going on. So that's how it is. Roland could not help but laugh. The subjects were indeed unwilling to bear the loss of handling fees when the situation was unclear, so they replaced the hazard avoidance items with other necessities. And in the past, food was often used as a general equivalent. As for dried goods and seasonings, they could be stored for a long time, and would eventually be needed. A familiar advertising slogan seemed to emerge in his mind. Paper for food, no loss, no fraud. What are you waiting for? But this also made Roland feel relieved. It was not realistic to change people's minds in just a few days, but the administrative office would not feel any pressure if they just turned to buying goods. For example, the output of wheat, eggs, and cheese in Neverwinter was enough to meet the needs of the entire western region. 3 months later, the Treasury would receive a new round of sales from the Joint Chamber of Commerce, and by then, the situation would be set. It doesn't matter. Let them buy as much as they like, he instructed Sirius. You have to keep an eye on the market for a while. There can't be any signs of a shortage in the market. As long as they don't reach the personal limit, they can buy whatever they want. The goods in the convenience market were all daily necessities. It could also be seen as a shop controlled and operated by the state, and one needed to have an ID card to purchase it. As long as those businessmen with large amounts of capital were not involved, short selling would basically not happen. Yes, Your Majesty. By the way, how did the other merchants react? Your Majesty, Barav continued. The merchants in Neverwinter are vaguely divided into 2 factions. The peddlers from all over the continent are still in a wait-and-see state. Many shops have announced their closure. Do you want to? He made a gesture of dismissal. If they can't refuse to accept SGD, should they just close their doors? Roland shook his head. The law doesn't apply. The lease of the shop hasn't expired yet, so it's up to them whether they want to open for business or not. What about the other faction? The big chambers of commerce in the fjords didn't react much, and continued their business as usual. However, I've received many letters from the fjords merchants asking if they can pay for the steam engine and paddle steamer with SGD. I've given them a positive reply as per your request. The reception room was instantly filled with whispers. Obviously, everyone was quite surprised by the situation. In their eyes, it was a disgrace to Grey Castle that the peddlers from their country had lost to the overseas merchants in supporting the king. Roland did not care. It seemed that the people of the sea were indeed more proactive in accepting new things. When the steam engine was first introduced, It was the fjord's native Marjorie who first showed great interest in it, and provided the first bucket of gold for the industrial development of Border Town. But there's also an exception. Barov coughed twice. A clothing store called Rainbow Stone didn't close its business. Instead, it put up a banner saying that it was holding a discount to celebrate the release of the SGD. According to my people, almost the entire long street was filled with residents who went to buy clothes. Roland blinked and then chuckled. Is it the Victor Lothar who came to me and asked to cooperate with Leaf? Should he say that the other party was brave? Or did he really comprehend his idea? Very well. He looked at Honey, the Minister of Publicity. Write a special report on this. At times like this, confidence is more important than gold. Understood. Honey nodded. Yes, Your Majesty. Confidence is more important than gold. Edith, who had been listening to them, suddenly said. Edith, who had been listening on the side, suddenly said, Please beware of those deliberately fabricated rumors. I think they will come soon. What do you mean? Barov frowned. Will there be people who deliberately want to harm the SGD? It's normal. There are people who benefit from the policy, and there are also people who suffer. For example, those merchants who don't want to accept the SGD, or those who simply want to shake His Majesty's foundation. You don't think that the nobles who once caused such a ruckus will really stop after only 2 years, do you? The old director was speechless. Of course they didn't. Roland knew that they were just temporarily dormant. As soon as he showed weakness, they would show their fangs again. Even if the demons were already at the city gate. Don't worry. Honey and Summer will watch out for me. And me. The mines in the western region will never have too many people. A cold voice rang out in the conference hall. Although they could only hear the voice and not see the person, no one would think that it was a joke. Roland looked around and said, Listen, this is just the beginning. After the first few months of stability, the SGD will be promoted to the whole country as soon as possible and completely replace the circulation of the Golden Dragon. This is very important for us to win the battle of divine will. Everyone still needs to work hard. As you wish, the crowd said in unison. Your Majesty. Barov agreed and then hesitated. We need to produce so many SGD in a few months. Can we make it in time? The current quantity is just enough to replace the salary, but it doesn't mean that the production is limited. You don't need to worry about that, Roland replied. Although the SGD was just a piece of paper, it was the pinnacle of technology in Neverwinter. Considering the huge number of Golden Dragon silver wolves accumulated over thousands of years, Roland had never considered letting Soroya carry this burden alone. In terms of paper, the SGD had mixed a certain proportion of rubber worm mucus into the paper pulp, which made it more flexible after drying and not easy to tear. The SGD had a denomination number made of tin foil, which would be embedded in the paper in advance. Only Neverwinter had the technology to make the tin as thin as a cicada's wing. The SGD was printed on a brand new roller printing machine. The pigment was provided by Dark Cloud and Broken Sword. The SGD was bright and durable, much better than the plant and mineral dyes of this era. It could last until the next round of SGD. It could be said that the SGD was the best in terms of production efficiency and counterfeiting. The witches only provided the raw materials, and the production could be done by ordinary people, so the SGD would not encounter any bottlenecks when it came to mass production. The smooth distribution of the SGD solved one of Roland's worries. Now that Neverwinter had both the people and the money, the only thing left was to turn these resources into productivity. Next, I plan to add a batch of projects, about 20,000 to 30,000 people, Roland said to the director of the administrative office, which used to be equivalent to the total population of a main city. Barov, you can discuss the specific distribution plan with the ministers of the relevant departments. Yes. First, the Ministry of Chemical Industry. Roland looked at Kyle Sichi. Chapter 1261. I need to expand an ammonia plant and a nitrate plant. You should have already prepared for this, right? Roland asked. Previously, the two plants were stuck on catalysts and had to rely on agatha and paper to solve the problem. The output had always been maintained at a moderate level. It was much higher than the original acid production method using saltpeter, but limited by the witch's magic power and population. There was no way to further expand the scale. Since completing the periodic table of elements, the chemistry laboratory immediately focused on establishing samples. With Lucia's element separation, the Ministry of Chemical Industry had now matched the elements on the table with the actual samples. This made some rather rare materials such as platinum and rhodium, which were commonly used in industrial nitrate production. Perhaps in terms of efficiency, it was not as efficient as agatha and paper, but as long as there were people, it could build as many factories as it wanted. As the saying goes, if quality was not enough, quantity could make up for it. Without the witches, quality and quantity could not be discussed. Yes, Your Majesty, Kyle said slowly. We've already verified the principle and made a small reaction vessel to simulate the synthesis process. As long as there are enough people, we can start construction at any time. I can give you priority to the literate immigrants. Go prepare after the meeting. Roland paused. In addition, I plan to open a new production line for lead-acid batteries. The Minister of Chemical Industry did not show any strange expression. Others might not know what it was, but he had already read all the books on elementary and intermediate chemistry, and all the content was engraved in his mind. Lead-acid batteries were also commonly known as batteries. The materials used were very simple: lead dioxide, and dilute sulfuric acid. It was not difficult for the alchemist's workshop, let alone the current Ministry of Chemical Industry. Using electrolyte solution to light a lamp was a classic experiment in high school chemistry. The advantage of batteries was that they could be recharged repeatedly, and only needed to be refilled with pure water every once in a while. The difficulty of manufacturing lead and lead dioxide plates was close to zero. They had not been produced before because they had limited uses and were not a priority due to the lack of population. The amount you need is about. Kyle took out a small notebook and recorded. 100 units per month is enough, Roland replied. The battery was mainly used to start the piston engine's cooler. As the most dazzling industrial crown of Neverwinter, it was really unstylish for the ground crew to shake the biplane when it took off. Previously, Neverwinter did not have enough manpower. Now that Neverwinter had received a large number of immigrants, they naturally did not have to worry too much. With more people, they could do whatever they wanted. With such a small amount, the factory will only need to hire a dozen new people to complete it, Kyle said as he stroked his beard. Of course, the manufacturing of the lead plates, shells and other components will require Her Highness Anna's help. If you can provide detailed drawings, the Ministry of Industry has no problem. Anna nodded. In that case, allow me to think about it for a few days before I submit the blueprint. Roland took a sip of tea with satisfaction. After several years of training, the administrative office was now full of talents, and cross-departmental cooperation had become the norm. This allowed him to only mention the beginning of many new projects, and someone else would finish them later. Next is the Ministry of Industry's mission. After the Battle of Tequila, his brain had a lot of things that needed to be improved and supplemented. Now he could finally let go and start working. The first thing he needed to do was to improve the combat capabilities of the infantry squads. This was the so-called General Machine Gun Project. The Mark I HMG would be replicated with lighter materials, and its structure would be optimized so that the gun body and frame could be separated and carried by one person. Bullets would be supplied by either a cartridge or a magazine. In this way, they could immediately launch a counterattack whenever they encountered an enemy. Even if the enemy was a senior demon, as long as they were not ambushed, they could provide suppressive firepower and create opportunities for the anti-demon grenadiers. Since there were no major changes to the structure, the focus of the lightweight project was on the materials. For example, aluminum alloy and plastic-like products made from rubber worm mucus. The production of both was not high, and the demand for biplanes was high, so the production would not be high. But it was better than nothing. Moreover, the Air Knight also needed machine guns, So putting this project on the agenda could be regarded as killing two birds with one stone. In Roland's opinion, even if the First Army fought in the Kingdom of Wolfheart and the Kingdom of Everwinter, they should still maintain their local superiority and firepower. Only elite squads with special missions such as reconnaissance, cover, and rescue would be equipped with this weapon. In addition, the semi-automatic rifle modified by Van had been transferred to the munitions factory for official production. Currently, they were replacing the bolt rifle at a ratio of 1:5, which meant that 1 out of 5 people would be equipped with a Vanna rifle. In addition to the logistical pressure, the linkage mechanism was exposed, which would reduce the durability of the rifle and cause it to jam easily. However, it could really improve the firepower of the soldiers. The second project was the biplane. After nearly 4 months of high-intensity testing, the first-generation biplane had been finalized and was named Skyfire. It was similar to the Unicorn, and its structure could not be considered complicated. However, if it was really produced and assembled by ordinary workers, the success rate would still be a problem. As for the engine, it could only be manufactured by Anna for the time being. Even so, Roland still planned to gather all the best workers in the industrial area to overcome this difficulty. It had been more than 3 years since the first steam engine factory was built. The blacksmith apprentices had also changed from wielding iron hammers to operating machine tools. Now was the best time to test the level of manufacturing in Neverwinter. In order to curb the mobility of the devil beasts, seizing the sky was the only solution. And the Skyfire was undoubtedly just the beginning. Lastly, it was to deal with the new appearance of the spider monstrous beasts and the shortcomings of the First Army. Roland planned to add a small caliber cannon between the mortars and the longsong cannons to attack and fight against the monstrous beasts. Its size was tentatively set at 75 millimeters, and it did not need to rely on the hummingbird to reduce weight and harden the road. It could also be used by the army. Usually 1 or 2 horses could tow it, and when there were no horses, people could also be used. This kind of infantry cannon did not have any technical difficulties, and it could be started by transferring a portion of the workers from the original cannon factory. However, before that, he had to first complete the trial production and test firing of the prototype. Roland had already discussed this with Anna countless times in private, so he did not need to explain in detail. She understood tacitly with just a few words. Nearly 10 factories would be built at the same time, and 20,000 to 30,000 people would be invested in the new project. It could be considered the grandest manufacturing project since the establishment of Neverwinter. And with the acceleration of the migration of immigrants, not only would the pace not stop, it would even become more intense. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.